Welcome to North Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, the football season is finally here, and you can tell that nature is healing as Tom Brady marched down the field and has another comeback win to his credit, and Mike McCarthy has another loss.
Yeah, no, we know that things are back to normal because the Cowboys choked on national television.
That is a good way to just kind of figure out where you are in the year.
Yeah, and honestly, I think everybody worried about the past 2 years, seeing all kinds of turmoil in the country, partisan divides ripping us apart. Know that with the Cowboys choking on national television, that the end is in sight. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. We can return to normalcy. And
speaking of nature healing itself, the Norse Code Fantasy League has already struck gold. And I realize it's my league, but like karmically, did I have to be the first person to get hit by this?
Yes.
By this missed extra point?
Why. You can't just be like, I know I deserve it, but did I deserve it? That's what you just asked.
This league that I love almost as much as my own children, these leagues that we have put together, I end up getting hit with the first missed extra point, negative 25 points for the game for that kicker. Yeah, that's exactly where I expected to be once the game started. So welcome to.
You're only one second before we. I know people don't want to talk about fantasy all that much, but I just want to add that I am so far behind in this particular matchup that you're only a 45% underdog. I'm only going to win like that's how far ahead the rest of your roster is than mine. That you took a 25-point hit from Greg Zuerlein, and I'm only a slight favorite after that.
This league doesn't make character, it reveals it. Love this league so much. It is a thing of beauty. Well, welcome to the regular season. Welcome to Norse Code. Glad you are all here with us. We have stuff to talk about. We have a game to preview, in fact. The game this weekend against the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll be bringing on a guest for that. Also, there is a Brian O'Neill extension that we're going to need to talk about because this was not the most unexpected news in the world, but it was something that was kind of done at the last minute before the season started. So, and of course the mailbag as well. But just want to thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. Hope you all are doing well. We are now in the regular season, so you can expect episodes twice a week. You can expect it after the Thursday night game and after the Monday night game. Monday night is obviously going to end up being the recap. So, again, hope you guys are doing well. If you enjoy Norse Code and would like to support us financially, you can do so in one of two different ways, or one of many different ways, actually. You can go to patreon.com/Norse Code and donate there. Get your tree fitty to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Get access to bonus material that we put out there during the regular season. Usually it's at least 2 bonus episodes a month, so check that out. We've got plenty of them. We've got over 30 bonus episodes over there, I believe. Also, you can go to paypal.me/Norse Code as well if you'd like to make a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and check out the collections. And maybe there's a t-shirt, maybe there's a mask over there with the awesome Drop Play Dave logo. Maybe there's a baby onesie that you'd like to pick up. There's options. I'm just saying there's options. But check that out, norsecode.threadless.com over at the collections portion. Do have 3 people I want to just quick mention who are supporting the show this week. Want to thank you to Neil Marr. Thank you so much for joining us over on Patreon. Also, Justine Helgeson, thank you as well. And a previous donor has increased his he's doubled his pledge actually to Sam Delker. Thank you, Sam, so much. We're in the regular season. These things help us so much because they help pay for just the software that we use to record. Like everything ends up getting paid for by the Patreon people. They are the people who make this show happen. Thank you guys so much. It is super appreciated. All right, so we've got all the shilling aside. Let's get into the episode because there's more than enough stuff to talk about. let's talk about the Brian O'Neill extension for just a moment, because there'd kind of been rumblings through the summer that there may end up being some form of an extension for Brian O'Neill, and he ends up coming up with a 5-year deal that's worth $92.5 million.
Yeah, the Vikings ended up paying $18.5 million a year. That's how that math works out. Obviously, the first couple of years of that contract are not that big. If you take a look at the over the cap breakdown, Brian O'Neill's contract ends up being like fairly reasonable for the first 2 years, and so that makes it feel like, hey, it's not that big a deal. The Vikings got a really great deal on it, but in 2023, the deal is like fairly massive. It's the cap number is 19.3 million. That repeats in 2024, and if you take a look at the over the cap cut table, it says, hey, if you cut him in 2023, you'll save $6 million against the cap. But the problem is that on March 19th of 2023, the salary becomes fully guaranteed that year. So that's actually not true. And you end up losing about $8 million that year once that activates. So the cut table doesn't work out like that. He has rolling guarantees in his contract in 2023 and 2024 that fully guarantee it. And so the Vikings are at a spot where if he doesn't live up to those contract expectations, they're in a really bad place. Like 2023 and 2024 are just brutal in terms of O'Neill's cap hit, and there's not a ton you can do about it because you don't really have a ton of leverage for a renegotiation because he's guaranteed that money that year. So it looks a little bit more reasonable, even though it doesn't end up doing that. But when I mentioned that I thought that this deal was actually a little bit above his level of performance, a lot of people were like, well, wait a couple of years, he's going to be the 13th cap hit in the league by then. And then you don't have to worry about it because of the expanding cap. And I'm sympathetic to that, right? I'm sympathetic to the idea that, the highest paid player at his position tends to be the most recent star at the position, right? And so you can't just say because this guy has the most money, that they're overpaying him. That's kind of how these cap cycles work, is that as the cap expands, the next player to hit the market that's going to be the top of their market is going to be the best player, is going to be the most expensive player, even if they're not the best at their position. There are a couple of ways to account for this, though, right? So if you just take a look at the raw numbers by average approximate value, Ryan Ramczyk is the only tackle making more than him, right? So Braden Smith and Lane Johnson, they just signed some really huge deals. Lane Johnson in 2019 to become the highest paid right tackle then. They're at 18 million and 7.5 million respectively. Taylor Moton is at 17.8 million, and he just signed a deal as well. And that makes it feel like, because two of these deals were signed in 2021, the Vikings are actually valuing him at like a fairly high cap hit. You take a look at somebody like Trent Brown, who has had some down years, so it's not as if Trent Brown is like a lock, a guaranteed, good right tackle, but he only costs $9 million. Now, mind you, that's a 1-year deal, so it's a little bit different, but he only costs $9 million against the cap. If you only take a look at the 2021 deals, Brian O'Neill is still really high within that category. And I don't know that he has played to that level, especially once you take into account last year's performance. But even more than that, you can just take a look at when deals were signed, what their average approximate value was when they signed, and divide it against the cap space of that particular year. And you can get kind of an approximate relative ranking. And even within that confine, Brian O'Neill is over 10% of the cap. He is still the second highest paid right tackle in the NFL, even when you adjust the other ones for their cap hits. And then the last part of that, the 2023 cap hit, that could be true kind of relatively speaking if his cap hit was the average, right? If it was $18.5 million every single year of the deal, then by like 2023, 2024, it would look fairly reasonable. But right now, as of 2023, he's the highest cap hit offensive lineman. And so it's unlikely that when the deal happens and you end up having to take on 19 million guaranteed in 2023, that you're going to end up looking at this and saying it's a good deal. Now, obviously, it's really tough for you to say something, or for me to say something along the lines of like, the Vikings should not have paid their only good offensive lineman, right? Like, that's a pretty tough argument to make. Actually, I was wrong. Lane Johnson, Taylor Moton both accelerate in 2023 as well. So Brian O'Neill will be third among right tackles. But it feels kind of weird, right? Because you have to say, well, he has to accept the deal, or the Vikings have to accept the deal. He's their only good and reliable offensive lineman. I don't think that that's true either. Partially because Brian O'Neill basically started off negotiations by telling his agent, whatever you do, keep me as a Minnesota Viking. And in so doing, it reveals that there was probably not a lot of leverage on behalf of the agent of Brian O'Neill, but the Vikings rewarded him anyway. I do want to bring up a piece from The Ringer that was published today, I think. I retweeted it today anyway, about finding ways to reward your best players as a means of, roster management, as a means of like demonstrating a good team culture and indicating that good players will get paid. In that piece, Eric Eager was interviewed and he brought up the fact that Nick Chubb, from an analytical perspective, the new deal he signed was actually fairly poor for the Browns and that they shouldn't have done it. There's two things about that are interesting. One is that Eager ends up saying, but it could have been worth it because it demonstrates to the team that you're willing to negotiate in good faith. So if the Vikings are willing to overpay Brian O'Neill, despite the fact that he gave up leverage, that demonstrates to the rest of the team that if you play well, you'll be rewarded. Second, Nick Chubb may be one of the few running backs that matters based off of like some of the analytics that I've looked at. I don't know if that's actually the case because, predictivity from year to year is difficult to determine, but he might be. But that's kind of an aside. Those are like the best arguments, I think, for Brian O'Neill, I think, are probably along those lines. And I actually don't think that that's a good argument. One, because I think the Vikings actually do a fairly good job of doing that anyway. I think, for example, the Dalvin Cook deal is a good example of that. And they've been aggressive about undercutting players, and they would do a better job resolving those instead of providing an incentive to Brian O'Neill. So, for example, Adam Thielen has been underpaid for most of his career with the Vikings. They didn't just give him some extra money. Same thing with Danielle Hunter. They were really aggressive in their negotiations with him. Danielle Hunter ends up massively underpaid, and it might have cost them their ability to go after someone like Trey Hendrickson in free agency because they might not have wanted to sign somebody that was going to get paid more than Danielle Hunter while Hunter was on the roster and potentially ready to hold out. So I don't think that's what the Vikings did. I think they probably just didn't negotiate very well on this deal. I think Brian O'Neill is a good right tackle. This is not me saying that he's not. And usually a bad deal for the team is a good deal for the player. So from the perspective of Brian O'Neill, happy for him. And he seems really happy too. Like in his presser, he really just talked about how much he just wanted to play for the Vikings, one, and that seemed very genuine. And two, that he just wanted to play football, that he just wants to go out there and play football, that he doesn't think too much about the money stuff. He just wants to go out there and play football. That came up like 8 times in the presser, and I'm pretty confident he means it. That's all fine. I'm happy for him. But from the perspective of the team, I think the Vikings did a really poor job here, even though he's a good right tackle. I don't think that he's better than Ryan Ramczyk or a healthy Lane Johnson or even necessarily Taylor Moton, although he's kind of difficult to determine because the Panthers didn't give him as much of a chance as they should have. He's not as good as who am I thinking of? Oh, yeah, Trent Brown again. Yeah. And when we see deals come up for, say, Jack Conklin, or when Tristan Wirfs has to sign a new deal or something, then we'll see kind of the massive gap between Brian O'Neill and some of these other players. So I don't really like the deal from the perspective of the Vikings. I love it from the perspective of Brian O'Neill because of those rolling guarantees. They're really great for him because he has so much guaranteed for injury, which I want to say for injury, he's guaranteed about $50 million, which is a really good deal. And he has those rolling guarantees where it makes it kind of impossible for the Vikings to cut him outside of like an injury context. So great deal for Brian O'Neill. I don't think the Vikings were forced into signing this deal. I think they were forced into signing a deal with Brian O'Neill, right? But I don't think that this was kind of the right deal for that. The deal runs to 2025 and 2026. Those numbers are fake to me. I don't think that those numbers. I think they'll have an extension in 2024 that reduces that 2024 hit and eliminates the 2025 and 2026 hit. So the fact that it's like 22.3 million in 2025 is immaterial. But yeah, really good tackle. Had a down year, I want to say, last year. So I wouldn't say that he was on a complete upward trajectory. But right now you're paying him like one of the best right tackles in the NFL. and I don't think he's like a top like 3 or even top 5 right tackle in the NFL right now. So that was, I think, an interesting misstep from the Vikings. It does clear up 2021 cap space, but that's not really a concern right before the season.
Well, and let's take a look at a couple of players here, because the last two players to get extensions now are Harrison Smith and Brian O'Neill, and you could argue that it was time for both of them. Who do you think is next to get some form of an extension from the Vikings?
I guess they're probably not bringing back Anthony Barr after they've voided out the rest of his contract, but he's up for a new deal. They could, if Adam Thielen has a big year, do kind of one of those we're rewarding you to reward you deals that we just talked about for Adam Thielen. Or Garrett Bradbury's deal is going to be up soon. If he actually has a good year, there's an opportunity there. But I don't know that there is a clear kind of next up to get a new deal. Obviously, there's going to be some negotiation over a Kirk Cousins contract next year. That's probably going to result in an extension. I'm sorry for people who don't want that. But that's the only way to get out of the $45 million cap hit that he's going to present in 2022. So those are probably your best options, unless I'm missing something like absolutely major. Danielle Hunter did sign a restructured deal that would essentially force the Vikings into negotiating a new deal with him long-term at the end of the season. So that's probably opportunities. Obviously, there are a lot of one-year contracts. If Patrick Peterson has a good year, they might want to bring him back. If Mackenzie Alexander has a good year, they'll want to bring him back. Same with Bashad Breeland, etc. But in terms of reworked deals and rewarding players, there's not a lot of options.
All right, well, let's take a look at the additional signings that have happened before week 1 begins, because in between when we recorded our last episode, which was right when the 53-man roster had come out, and 24 hours later, chaos proceeded to go all through Egan as players were cut and then re-signed, and then punters that were safe are no longer safe. So let's talk about a couple of additional signings before the week 1 season opener.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. I think the most prominent one is the punter, unless I'm missing something big, but no, I think it's the punter. That one's kind of an interesting one. So the Vikings mentioned in their presser that they really liked his hang time. And I remember when I was doing a little bit of background research on him, that was probably the first thing I was going to bring up when it came up on the show. It wasn't worth writing a whole piece. So I just kind of thought about hang time for a second. Didn't really have much to do with it. But he ended up having, I think last year he was tied for 9th in the NFL in average hang time. And then I think over the course of the last not in 2020, over the course of the last 4 years combined, he tied for 9th in the NFL. So, I mean, that's pretty good, right? Britton Colquitt had a 10th of a second lower hang time, which isn't good, but it's not bad either. 10th of a second can be fairly significant when you're talking about punt gunners who are running at full speed down the field. Think about the difference between a 4.4 guy and a 4.5 guy, right? That's the difference between, whether or not there's going to be room for the punt returner or not. So the average hang time for Jordan Berry was quite high relative to other punters, especially relative to other punters that had at least 200 punts over the last 5 years. And in that category, I think he ranks 5th. So that's kind of the most important thing with him. There's a number of things that he does well. He gets the ball inside the 20 without causing touchbacks. So his inside the 20 to touchback ratio was 11th in the league, which, Colquitt wasn't bad at. I think that's the one area where Colquitt was a little bit better. But yeah, for the most part, Berry does a pretty good job of finding ways to get close to the end zone without causing touchbacks. He also had much better ball placement in terms of where the punts go, and that's not a PFF thing. That's me watching 20 punts from him and 20 punts from Colquitt. The high hang time and the long distance allow a huge difference in the percentage of punts returned. About half of Colquitt's punts over the last 5 years have been returned. Only about a third of Jordan Berry's punts were returned. And I think that's kind of what the Vikings were looking at when they decided to make this decision, because their net yards are not that far apart over the last couple of years. Although I think Colquitt might be at the end of his rope because last year was really bad in terms of net yards. And and Barry wasn't like all that bad in terms of net yards. And so I think that in terms of like the way that they wanted to approach the position, I think they wanted to take a look at, who was doing well recently as well. So it's not just over the last 5 years, because the Vikings were one of the worst teams in terms of net yards. I think Britton Colquitt ranked like 30th, 29th in net yards among all punters, among all qualifying punters, whereas Jordan Berry ranked middle of the pack in terms of that. So that's good, but I think primarily they wanted to reduce the number of explosives, and sometimes that doesn't get caught up in the averages. The percentage of punts returned is like a big part of it, and so I think that was really big for them. He also has like a higher PFF grade over the last 5 years, for whatever that's worth. It's punting. We've already talked about it too much.
Was there anybody else that needed to just have a quick mention, because Everson Griffin was cut and then was re-signed?
Chris Herndon.
Yeah, Chris Herndon.
Yeah, Chris Herndon. I covered him in the Athletic piece breaking down the 53-man roster, but primarily just what to think of him is he's somebody that, coming off of a 2019 injury, had a really poor 2020 season, really looked like he had lost his explosiveness and athleticism, had a lot of trouble maintaining focus, had a lot of trouble staying on assignment, started out camp as the number one tight end this year in Jets camp, and finished as one of four. I don't think that they, at the time they traded him, had determined who was 1, 2, 3, and 4, but all four of those tight ends were on the same plane. I imagine that, like, after Yeboah's really incredible preseason performance, that he kind of moved up to tight end 1. But either way, Herndon has kind of regressed pretty substantially from his initial rookie year showing. The one thing I got from people who cover the Jets pretty in depth is that he is a quote unquote decent blocker, which, maybe that's damning with faint praise, but it's something the Vikings don't really have among that tight end unit, because, Zach Davidson can't really do much of anything quite yet. Brandon Dillon is not a great blocker. I thought he improved pretty substantially as a blocker in his second year with the Vikings, but he was so far behind that it's still not very good in terms of blocking. And then obviously Tyler Conklin, he's primarily a receiving guy as well. So Herndon gives them some blocking capability, but for the most part, I don't even think we're going to see him that much week 1. I think it's going to be Herndon, Conklin, Dillon, and then we'll see maybe a couple of snaps here and there of Herndon. But yeah, I mean, Amir Abdullah's on the practice squad. Sean Mannion's on the practice squad. They were both protected. Mannion, I guess, counts as an addition, right? Because they cut Jake Browning, put him on the practice squad, and they added Sean Mannion. And I think he's effectively going to be quarterback too. So that counts. We talked a little bit about Everson Griffin already, of course, who was cut and then re-added. And then, that's it. I mean, they added like Christian Jackson or something. I don't know much about him, so I'm not going to pretend I do.
Yeah, it seemed like a bit of chaos, much more than normal, as far as the signings and the cuts and then the re-signings thing. So it was just a little bit odd to sit and watch, but we do have a 53-man roster. We do have a game coming up. And speaking of which, it is time to go to a guest. So right now we're going to go to an interview that Arif cut earlier today with John Sheeran. He is of the Cincy Jungle and the Orange and Black Insider podcast. And they talked all about the matchup for week 1 for the Vikings versus the Bengals. So let's go to that right now.
All right, I'm here with John Sheeran, the deputy manager of Cincy Jungle, and he also told me to call him Joe Goodberry's younger brother. I think that's a reference to the fact that I told him outright that I had booked someone else and he couldn't make it, Joe Goodberry specifically, and he's a little salty. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm much more successful and handsome than Joe, so I mean, he can have the age.
That's definitely true. Actually, that's the reason why I tried booking him, is because I think with him being less successful and uglier, he'd have more free time, which turned out to not be the case.
He is like the busiest retired man I've ever known. It's insane.
Yeah, right. Well, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to be here talking about week 1. It's here.
Yeah, right. Yeah, wild. It feels like this offseason was a little bit longer than most, so glad to have that back, man. So we'll do what we always do at Norse Code. It's going to be a position group by position group breakdown. But before we kind of get into that, I did want to ask just a little bit about how you feel about the Bengals kind of offensive philosophy, right? Because Zach Taylor was hired in part because he had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay, which seemed to be kind of the trend du jour. My understanding was Zach Taylor was not at the top of the list from the Bengals interview perspective. Either way, when he was hired, it was kind of like, who is this guy? But I mean, the same was kind of true for Matt LaFleur that's been working out in Green Bay. What do you feel about the offensive philosophy and about Zach Taylor?
So just going back there, like I remember they like reached out to like Josh McDaniels, and I think they like interviewed Eric Bieniemy. So like when they landed on Zach Taylor, I think a lot of people were a little bit underwhelmed considering who they initially reached out to. But there's a funny story about that, like because Andrew Whitworth was playing for the Rams at the time that obviously
that's right.
They were hiring, and they reached out to Whitworth, and Whitworth was like, I mean, Taylor's okay, you know, he's just an assistant, and like they took that as like gospel and said, oh, this guy is definitely on the up and up. And I think it was like it was a joke at the time, like, you know, like if anyone knows Sean McVay, then they're obviously qualified to be a head coach. But I think this was like the best example of that because the guy was so unproven, just like half a season coordinating the Dolphins offense a few years back, and then a full season of coordinating the UC Bearcats offense was ranked like 120th. So, we didn't really know what to expect because the guy had like the least amount of bullet points on his resume for being a head coach. But for the most part, you expected a lot of similar things to the McVay system in Los Angeles. And then after a year of suffering through Andy Dalton and Ryan Finley, he got his quarterback in Joe Burrow. And it was almost like the marriage between the Rams running game, which is a lot of wide zone, and the LSU Tigers passing game, which was spread 11 personnel out into empty, you know, utilize 3 receiver sets for at least 80% of your plays, move around your running back. He can be in the slot, he can be out wide, or he can be in the backfield. Don't really utilize a lot of tight ends. And now I think you are seeing that system in LSU kind of formulating itself around the personnel that they have, but they also want to be under center more. They have their offensive line coach, Frank Pollock, back, who institutes a heavy wide zone running scheme. They like to think that they have the proper offensive line personnel to implement that scheme, and that is the scheme that Joe Mixon was really successful with in 2018 when he led the AFC in rushing. So it's a weird hybrid between a lot of similar passing concepts that you saw at LSU when Burrow was there, and a lot of running concepts that when the Rams were really good with Todd Gurley, that was kind of what they wanted to, I guess, combine in this like weird hybrid form.
Did they continue that hybrid stuff when like Ryan Finley was in there, when Brandon Allen was in there?
Like it was so just bland and basic because they just knew that they couldn't really do anything with that. It was a lot more under center stuff to try to simplify things for them. And the sample size wasn't that large. I think Finley only started 3 games. Allen started like 5 or 6 games for them last year. Yeah, I think he missed the Steelers game when that was Finley in there, and that offense was a complete just joke and somehow it worked against the Steelers. So it was definitely more simplified compared to what they had Burrow and I guess Dalton doing in the first 2 years. And it was almost like it's almost, you can't really tell, like you can't take anything tangible away from this because they know that their quarterbacks are just so limited in that sense.
Cool. Well, yeah, let's talk about that quarterback group then to start us off. So aside from Father Stretch My Hands, Brandon Allen, you know that story, right?
I do not, actually.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I guess I get to tell you something about the Bengals. So Brandon Allen, lead up to the draft at the Senior Bowl, had his hands measured, and they were like at 9 inches, right? And the NFL gospel is you need 9 1/4 or something like that. Otherwise, you're a bust, right? That's it. Your hand size. And I guess he was like pretty disappointed about that. Sounds like he was like might have even been distraught. I don't know, but ended up getting a hand massage person to come in and massage his hands every day up until the combine, so that when the quote unquote official combine measurement came in, his hands would be large enough to be draftable. And it worked. His hands measured at 9. Well, who knows if it worked, right? There's just variance between the Senior Bowl and the Combine. But it worked out, right? And his hands were 9 1/4 at the Combine. He ended up, I guess he didn't get drafted, right? He was an undrafted free agent for Jacksonville?
Yeah.
Carolina.
Jacksonville, I think.
Yeah. So, you know, great.
What the hell?
I hope I got the right guy. I know that this happened I'm going to Google this right now. This is great podcasting. We're doing.
I'm upset that I didn't know about this before. Like, I think Burrow should have done that because he got crucified for having 9.25 hands.
Yeah, but it didn't come down to him. Drafted. It was Brandon Allen. Okay, I got it right. Okay, I'm happy. I got it right.
That is incredible.
Wow. If you search Brandon Allen massage hands, there's like lots of. There's even like the fourth result on my Google is like a massage place. They're like, yeah, growing hands with myofascial therapy. All right, cool. Well, that's something we've all learned today. Let's talk about Joe Burrow. The early part of training camp, the word was that he was a coward. I'm using intentionally crude language here, but is he not a coward? Why didn't he play in the preseason? Is he scared?
All very good and very valid questions. He was medically cleared officially like right before the start of training camp, and they saw no use to really put him out there in the preseason. I mean, that's, I guess, more common now. Like, I don't even think Herbert played at all during the preseason. Like, it's entirely up to the coach, I guess. But there was something to be said about Burrow's confidence. Like, in the first week of training camp, when he was facing like quote unquote live pass rush for the first time in 9 months, he looked a little bit flustered, and he wasn't as accurate. He wasn't as quick with his timing and stuff like that. And I think a lot of us just attributed that to rust and just, getting more reps to kind of shake it off, I guess. But we actually just learned, I think yesterday, that Thaddeus Moss, who was his teammate at LSU, he's now on the practice squad as a tight end, he kind of came up to Burrow like in the early part of training camp and said, "Hey man, like, I remember you being a lot more of a vocal like leader in LSU. Like, why aren't you really like utilizing that type of style?" And Burrow kind of realized, like, hey, you know what? He's kind of right. Like speaking for Burrow, I took so many like months to rehab and kind of get back into football shape that I kind of took a step back in terms of like how I wanted to, I guess, conduct and lead the offense. And he said that once he kind of took that step forward back to where he was as, I guess, like the commanding quarterback, whatnot, he felt, I guess, more comfort in like his muscle memory, and then things like started to click, I guess. So it was a very weird way of him kind of shaking off the rust and getting back to the Burrow that Moss and Chase and that they knew back in 2019. But ever since that first week, we saw, or we at least heard about, like the old Burrow kind of coming back, much more decisive, much more accurate. And there are reports about his velocity being a lot better. He did a lot of work with Jordan Palmer over the offseason to up his just overall velocity and his mechanics with his footwork. So it's hard to really buy into that until we see it on the field for itself. But there was that rust period, and I think it was just him getting his confidence back as the guy, like, I'm healthy now, and I need to lead this team, because if I don't, then this team is going literally nowhere.
So Randy Moss's son saved the season.
100%, yes.
Wow, incredible. What a great story. That's the headline. Now let's talk a little bit about Joe Burrow's game. So from what we saw last year, assuming that we can project what we saw last year into this year, Zimmer said this a number of times in the pressers today and on Monday. Burrow gets the ball out quickly. He reads the field quickly. He diagnoses where he wants to go. He's got really good pre-snap reads for a young player. But you talk to opposing coaches, they'll almost always, at least in front of the media, only provide praise. They won't provide criticism. The knock, at least according to Draft Twitter, and I think a fair amount of like fairly qualified film analysts, is that his arm strength wasn't entirely there to be kind of a five-tool quarterback, as it were. That his arm strength was a limiting factor in terms of the development of his game. Now, you mentioned that he worked with Jordan Palmer to increase his ball velocity. How confident are you, A, that this will resolve that problem, or B, alternatively, that this actually wasn't that big of a problem, and how would it manifest itself in a game situation?
It is interesting to go back and watch the LSU tape and watch the rookie season tape and see how much of a difference like it is playing with, I guess, subpar velocity going against the SEC and then going up against the NFL. It did hinder him at times. And I think the offense coordinator, Brian Callahan, said it really best. Like, when you have that added velocity in your back pocket, it can increase like the timing patterns and those route combinations. It can increase the effectiveness if you can get the ball out there even quicker. Like, you don't have to wait, or you don't have to get it out like as soon as possible, because you have to account for your, I guess subpar velocity. So now with that added velocity in his back pocket, I think his strengths can only be amplified. And we saw some clips in OTAs and training camp, and you can see a visible difference. You see more of a pop with the ball coming out of his hand, and I think receivers also kind of took notice of it as well. But I never really saw it as a giant hindrance in his game last year. I didn't think that was the reason why he wasn't as effective as others. And we can have the debate about how much does arm strength and velocity really matter on some of these deep balls. A lot of it was, I think, a matter of timing and a matter of just communication with the receivers. He never really got on the same page with AJ Green for whatever reason. And honestly, like it didn't really seem like arm strength was the reason for the deep ball struggles. I think a lot of it was just placement and timing. But when you have that arm strength that you can just deploy at any time, it does make it a lot easier. So if that's the case, and he just continues to kind of develop that timing with his receivers, but he also has just a couple more miles per hour on some of those throws, I think it will make a difference ultimately.
All right, so because you've taken the place of Joe Goodberry, you're going to be forced to defend some of his takes.
Oh boy.
So he is remarkably optimistic, I think is maybe the best way to put it.
Uncharacteristically for him, I should say.
Actually, yeah. If you've been following Joe Goodbarrow for a number of years, as we have, optimism about the Bengals has not really characterized his approach, right? Mm-hmm. So what did he predict? An 11-5 season for the Bengals, right? Something like that.
10 or 11 wins, I think, was the prediction.
Yeah, it was 10. You're right. Yeah, it was 10 or 11 wins, I think, is the framing that he chose, both in a podcast and on Twitter promoting the podcast. And then he went on to add that a number of teams have taken, a huge jump from 5 or so wins to a bunch of wins. He included, of course, the Baltimore Ravens, moving to Lamar Jackson, and I don't think he included the Kansas City Chiefs as the adding wins, but he included Mahomes as a quarterback that took a remarkable leap, which is not really fair because Mahomes had one game as a rookie and looked really good in that game. But still, there are some, not comparisons in terms of talent or playing style, but in terms of situation of kind of elite or sub-elite quarterbacks that have taken a huge step from Joe Goodberry. Why is Joe Burrow going to do this, Joe Goodberry's younger brother?
We know he's talented enough. I think just despite, we can get into production, and you do a great job of analyzing, which quarterbacks are going to progress or regress. I think your work with Justin Herbert on that was exemplary this offseason. But we can talk about, what production means. But also, I think there is some form of an eye test that you can perform. There are things that Burrow was doing as a rookie that we never saw from Andy Dalton in his 9 years. And it's, I guess, a low bar in comparison. But, he's the number one pick for a reason. The stuff that he was doing at LSU was very advanced, albeit he was a fifth-year quarterback who was basically a quarterback as a job. He was barely a student at LSU, but his cerebral capability to just command an offense in the pre-snap and the post-snap phase, it was remarkable, and it really translated extremely early on in his NFL career. Really, we talk about the arm strength, but I think his biggest issue last year was just him trying to extend as many plays as possible, and it got him into very precarious situations where he took one too many hits or one too many pressures because he was just trying to do everything that he could get away with in LSU. And he realized that, I think, early on in the season that he can't really do that. He has to get down. He has to get the ball out quicker. He has to kind of say uncle on some of these plays. Otherwise, he's going to get hit 100 more times every single year from here on out. So I think now that he has that in the back of his mind, he obviously has the memory of being injured so catastrophically. I think he is going to be a little bit more quicker in terms of giving up on plays that do need to give up, but he's never going to lose that playmaking style of extending plays with his legs and creating out of structure. And I think that is the biggest thing to look for in terms of quarterbacks who can be elite in this game. It's the guys that are not only very decisive and get the ball out when it calls for it, but the guys who will look for the explosive plays down the field, have the athleticism to get out of the pocket, and also the timing and the arm talent to make those throws down the field happen. They didn't quite have the personnel to really do as many things as they wanted last year, but now he's loaded with receiving weapons. He at least has two competent tackles in the center in front of him. He has a running game if he needs it. I think just in the history of quarterbacks taking that second-year jump, Burrow kind of fits the bill in terms of having the talent and having the supporting cast to really accomplish it.
Yeah, it's sweet. That was a great answer. We're going to talk about the receivers in a second. I want to finish the offensive section on them because I love talking about those receivers. But That allows us, I think, to talk about a less interesting unit, the tight ends, and then we'll move to running backs, the receivers, and the offensive line, then the receivers. So these tight ends, they don't sound like they're going to be the star of the offense. Drew Sample is a 2019 second-round pick, mostly a blocking tight end, from what I understand. C.J. Uzomah played for the Texans, I want to say, right?
No, he was a Bengals pick.
Oh, he was a Bengals pick. Okay. What's the deal here? Should the Vikings be concerned? What function do they fit within the offense? Is there like a threat here that they should be paying attention to, or kind of what's your take on this group?
So Uzomah was injured very early last season. He tore his Achilles in week 2, and he quietly led all Bengals receivers in targets through the first 7 quarters of the season. I don't know if that's going to translate into him being equally as involved in the offense this year.
I would hope not.
Right. Like you're not projecting 70 or 80 targets for CJ Uzomah, but I think he's a bit under the radar in terms of just the overall landscape of tight ends, just because he never really had the opportunity to break out. He was always behind Tyler Eifert, and then the years that he started, he was basically run of the mill, like about 40 receptions, 400 or so yards. And I think that's a fair projection. Again, they like Drew Sample, but I mean, everyone and their mother knew that pick was awful in 2019, and he's not netted any positive returns after that. But I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. It's just in this offense specifically, when you only have one tight end out there on the field for 80% of the plays and 100% of the passing plays, there's only so much that you can expect him to do. So Uzomah, I think, is basically an average tight end with above average athleticism in an offense in a role that's not going to net him opportunities like a Darren Waller or Travis Kelce. But I think they do like his overall athleticism. He can block really well. He's a better than advertised receiver, but again, the opportunities for him to really pop off in production-wise, it's just not really there in this offense.
That's fair. This allows us also to talk about the running backs a little bit more of an exciting unit. You've got Captain America, I think, is the third-string running back. Samaje Perine, who I really liked at Oklahoma, honestly. And he was teammates with Joe Mixon at Oklahoma, right? Am I screwing that up?
Yes.
Yeah. So really fun. Obviously, this is going to end up being a battle of second-round running backs with Joe Mixon and Dalvin Cook. I think the Vikings would have taken Mixon. Don't source me on that. I think the Vikings would have taken Mixon had Dalvin Cook not been there, which means they wouldn't have made the trade with the Bengals to get that to happen. But pretty fun, I think, overall backfield. Tell us a little bit about Chris Evans, about Samaje Perine, and, of course, Joe Mixon, who Michael Pierce outlined as a particular threat that people need to pay attention to because I think, what did he say? People don't know it, but he's a 3-down back, and he's got power and speed, so you can't say he's a power back or a speed back. We'll talk about that quote in a second, but let's talk about Chris Evans and Samaje Perine.
So I think Evans is the guy to look for, not for this game specifically, but for in just this season in general, a guy who can sneaky produce. I don't know why I said sneakily like that, but Evans, I think, came to Michigan as a receiver, and he was barely used because Jim Harbaugh is kind of an idiot, and he wasn't even on the team for the last year because he was expelled for plagiarism. So he completely went under the radar this draft season, but an incredible athlete in space with just
super
very
tester.
natural.
Him and Jake Funk, I think, were the two super testers at running back this last year.
Right, and not only are they athletic, but they know what to do with their hands, not only in pass protection, but as a receiver. They used him a decent amount in the preseason at receiver. I think he caught their longest touchdown of the preseason in week 3, and it just looked very natural for him to just track the ball over his shoulder. So as a receiver, I think you can see him a decent amount this year in the slot. They only have 3 running backs, so he's going to be active on game days, and I don't think they're relying him that much on special teams. So I think the majority of his damage as a rookie, and maybe over the course of his rookie contract, will be as a receiver, because I think they really want to utilize that. And with Perine, I think he basically takes over what Giovanni Bernard was in recent years, because Bernard came into the league as this electrifying
back. Very
back.
Weird comparison. Sorry.
Right, just let me explain this. So obviously Bernard came into the league an explosive little back who could catch the ball in the backfield and make guys miss. That wasn't really what he ended at in Cincinnati. He was basically just a 3rd down back who would be used in pass protection, but his usage as a receiver extremely decreased as the years went on. Perine, I think, basically takes over what Giovanni Bernard became in Cincinnati, just a limited running back who, at the end of the day, is mainly there for pass protection and to spell Joe Mixon as a ball carrier. Pirine doesn't have the explosiveness or the agility or lucidness of a Giovanni Bernard, but I think they trust him in pass protection to leave him out there for some of those downs. And whenever they need to give Mixon a break as a runner between the tackles, I think that is where his role is going to be utilized.
All right, Joe Mixon. Is Michael Pierce correct? And if he's not correct, why do you hate Joe Mixon?
It took 5 years, I guess, but I think this is the year where Joe Mixon does catch 50 or so passes.
Finally, he's going to break out as a receiver.
Right, and that was so obvious at Oklahoma. The dude was incredibly talented, incredibly productive, both as a receiver and a runner. And they had Giovanni Bernard there, and he would just take these catches for 7 or 8 yards, and they would use him in very uncreative ways, and they would use Mixon even less creatively. They would use him specifically as a runner. They never really trusted him in pass protection, and they never really looked at him as a receiver. But now I think he's going to take on both of those roles more as a true 3-down back. So, we talked about Pirine taking over for Bernard, but really I think it's also entrusting Mixon more into those responsibilities as well. You're going to see Mixon lined up outside in the slot, in the backfield as a receiver. I think they want to be more creative and get him more involved in the passing game. They're paying him $12 million a year, so they better be doing this to maximize the return on investment of that deal. But it really does seem like it's been 5 years in the making for this. But he's going to get a lot of touches this year for sure.
I always count on that 5th-year running back breakout.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm throwing all kinds of shit. I think that Joe Mixon is pretty talented. All right, well, let's talk about the actual receivers. Sorry. I still skipped over the offensive line again. All right, let's talk about the offensive line. We're not going to see Jackson Carman this week. It's going to be Xavier Su'a-Filo playing for him.
Correct.
And Quentin Spain's also at guard. And then Trey Hopkins is regrettably still at center. But Riley Reif at right tackle. He's played right tackle a fair amount with the Lions, not so much with Minnesota. But Riley Reif at right tackle, Jonah Williams at left tackle. And Williams started out his career as a guard, right? And then he's moved to tackle last year?
I think they always had him at left tackle, but he didn't play as a rookie because he was injured.
Okay.
So
That's right. He was injured as a rookie. So you already said that you think that the tackle group is fine, right? Which is a good way to describe Riley Reif. I'm a lot less familiar, of course, with Jonah Williams. What do you think that this group, these pair of tackles do well, and what do they struggle with? And knowing that one of them has to line up against Danielle Hunter, I presume it'll be Riley Reif, but they have been moving him around. And, if I were the Vikings, I'd want to test him against Jonah Williams rather than someone who's a little bit more familiar with him. But what do you think that Danielle Hunter might be able to do to take advantage of those weaknesses?
So I think both Williams and Reif are like their strengths are in their hands, in their technique. They're not going to make a lot of mistakes in their pass sets. And you've obviously watched Reif for many years, and you know of his strengths and weaknesses. I think with Reif, he's probably a better run blocker than Williams is, but that was the emphasis with Williams this offseason. So he was 300 pounds coming out of Alabama. He stayed at that weight for the first 2 years. I think he's up to 315 now under a new offensive line coach because they wanted him to be more effective as a run blocker. That's where his shortcomings were as a first-year player last year. He was fine in pass protection. I think he graded really well in terms of PFF pass blocking grades and true pass sets and whatnot. And because he was coming out of Alabama, he was really technically refined. He was the 11th overall pick for a reason. It was just he never really could generate a lot of movement in the ground game. And I think for both of them, a guy like Danielle Hunter can give both of them issues because Hunter is an athletic freak. And I think just in today's NFL, even if you have two guys in Williams and Reif who aren't going to make a lot of mistakes with their hands or be out of place in their pass sets, you just have a couple reps against some of these guys who can dip under you and explode off the line, and they're going to beat you with just pure athleticism. And I think that is where Hunter can take advantage regardless of who he's lining up against. I think Williams and Reif as a duo is the best tackle duo that the Bengals have had in 6 years. But even still, these guys aren't, they're not Teron Armsteads, they're not Tyron Smiths or anything. They're not huge and athletic.
No Andrew Whitworths, right?
Exactly, and no Andrew Whitworth. So unfortunately, they do have some weaknesses against some of these guys who can just explode off the line and kind of truck you from underneath. So at the very least, they're not going to get beat with silly mistakes, which is more than what they could say with their tackles of the past.
Yeah, Bobby Hart really held down the fort there. Let's talk about that was kind of a bleak overview of those tackles that you like. Let's talk about
they're good, but like I'm just trying to temper expectations.
Let's talk about an even bleaker subject: the interior offensive line. Trey Hopkins is quick, and Quentin Spain and Xavier Su'a-Filo have a lot of experience. Your turn.
I like Trey Hopkins, honestly. Like I think if it's not Jonah Williams, it's Trey Hopkins as the best offensive lineman on this team. Like he started off as a guard, but then under Frank Pollock when he was there in 2018, he moved him to center. He really took off and really excelled at the position. And that's where he's been ever since. I think that is where he belongs. And for what they want to do in terms of zone blocking, I think he really gets out of his stance really well. And him excelling is the reason why Billy Price is now with the New York Giants, on top of Billy Price being awful. But
there's a lot of reasons that they would move on from Billy Price.
But he's a much better fit for what they need at center, and I think he's a solid player. And you're not really going to get on a center for his pass protection because he's never really tested that much. But I think he's solid. Quentin Spain, Xavier Su'a-Filo. If you had asked Bengals fans in like February if these two were starting, they would hate the idea. They would despise it. Now, after seeing what has happened in training camp and preseason, the offensive line was not bad. And I think even if it was preseason, Bengals fans will take that and run with it and say like, oh, this group is going to look so improved. It's more of a wait and see situation. Playing against Sheldon Richardson and Michael Pierce and Tomlinson, like that's a pretty strong trio to go up against in pass protection. I think Spain and Su'a-Filo are fine. It's just like it would be much better if you could only have to count on them for like 400, 300 snaps a year. But I think one of these guys is going to end up starting for the entire year, and one of them is eventually going to be replaced by Jackson Carman at one of the spots. So it's just like they're going to have some decent weeks, and they're probably going to be outmatched by some of these other defensive tackles. So it's more of a wait and see situation right now.
All right, so John Sheeran, optimistic about the interior offensive line, pessimistic about the tackles. Got it. Makes sense to me. Sorry. Okay, finally, these receivers. We're going to talk about them. So T. Higgins did not get his flowers last season, right? Like we saw CeeDee Lamb go off, we saw Justin Jefferson go off, we saw Chase Claypool go off, we saw some love for Michael Pittman. I'm sure there's another rookie receiver I forgot that got more attention than T. Higgins did, and fairly so. It was a remarkable class, and they showed out as rookies. Those guys all deserve the love that they got, probably. Who knows, right? It could have been a fluke somewhere, but they all look good to me. T. Higgins is right in the mix in that group and kind of went super under the radar. Part of it, of course, is being on a losing team. Part of it is like the difficulties of producing enormous numbers with Ryan Finley and Brandon Allen half the season. But man, this dude is good. If the Bengals had passed on Jamar Chase and said, hey, we're going to be a 2 wide receiver team or even a 3 wide receiver team with T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Auden Tate, I think people would have been fine. Obviously, they would have drafted somebody else later, but it would have made sense, right? But they decided to double down. They know that there's a bunch of really great teams with a bunch of super great receiver groups. They grabbed Jamar Chase. We'll talk about Chase's preseason struggles and what that means for this game in a second. But I just want to talk about T. Higgins for a second and then also devote some time to Tyler Boyd, who also does not get enough love. To me, he's like, how 3 years ago everyone said that Robert Woods is the most underrated receiver in the league. No longer the case. Might be Tyler Boyd. So let's talk about Higgins and Boyd.
So the whole thing with like Chase was it was under the assumption that Higgins was never going to really be that dynamic number one receiver. And lo and behold, this offseason, that's exactly what we're hearing from the Bengals. Like of all the players, aside from like maybe Joe Mixon, he has looked like the most improved in terms of just the way that he moves out on the field. And it makes sense, right? Like the guy was 21 last year. He didn't test at the combine. He had some pro day numbers that may or may not have been legitimate. But no one ever really saw him as a burner, a guy that can separate deep or even win with route running in general. And now it looks like he's the reincarnation of young AJ Green for some reason. Like whatever he did this offseason.
Okay, pal. All right.
I'm just reading off what I read. Like that's not me saying it. That is me examining the Kool-Aid that's being drunk over at Bengals training camp. That is what is being said, and obviously we need to see it to believe it. But by all accounts, he looks more explosive. He hasn't dropped a single pass, I think, in all of training camp. So the strengths of contested catchability is still there, but he looks like a more dynamic athlete, and that means a lot for a team that needs 3 quality receivers. Like he was fine last year in his role. He ascended as a starter as the season went on. Kind of went through some growing pains, but he ended the season on a high note. and now it looks like he's carrying that momentum into this year.
All right, so T. Higgins, a quote-unquote young A.J. Green. Let's talk about Tyler Boyd. The whole show is me taking you out of context, by the way, so I
100%,
yeah. So let's talk about Tyler Boyd.
I like Tyler Boyd. I like, in terms of just being a savvy route runner who can, win over the middle and be your third down guy. I think that's fine. Like, how much of your offense can really run through him? Probably not that much. Like, he had to be basically the number one receiver in this offense for the last 2 years. And when Tyler Boyd is getting like 100 targets and he has explosion on the outside of him, like, that's fine. But when you have to run your offense completely through him and he has to separate against some of these perimeter cornerbacks, it can get kind of troublesome. When Tyler Boyd really popped off in like 2018, that was when AJ Green had his last good year, and they had even John Ross producing like 7 touchdowns that season. So he was in like the perfect situation because defenses weren't really keying in on him, and he can just win his one-on-one battles in the slot. I think now is when you can kind of see that return to that role that kind of fits him well. And obviously has a good rapport with Burrow. There was times last year where the connection to the two of them was pretty damn special to see. They had that no-look pass against Tennessee that converted like a third down in the red zone. So Boyd, you can always count on him. He's the team captain for the first time in his career. You just expect just that solid like 90, 80 catch season for around like 900 or 1,000 yards. So there's no concern at all with Boyd. But yeah, like at the end of the day, he's Tyler Boyd, just like Jarvis Landry with Cleveland. There's no real reason to really overrate him.
All right, fair enough. All right, so Jamar Chase, the bad faith take now, which this interview was like 2 days ago. I don't know why it blew up today, but right, like the piece that was initially published that talked about him looking the ball in with different striping on it. That was published a couple of days ago and then just blew up because PFT found it. But the bad faith take here is that Jamar Chase found out that the NFL ball is bigger and does not have the white stripes on either end of the ball, and instead he has to look at it on the laces. Probably a better faith take is Jamar Chase was discussing how the ball was different and also was discussing his high drop rate in the preseason and connected the two a little bit by talking about concentration. But, whatever. It's tough to catch the ball because it is slightly larger and does not have white stripes. Your take.
Yeah, so he was expecting those white stripes, and when it wasn't there, he thought it was a basketball, so he kind of adjusted his hands a little bit, and all of a sudden he couldn't catch it. Like the guy has no accountability, right? That's why that's why I guess he bought a jugs machine for his own place so he can catch more than 100.
You think in the offseason he would have worked with an NFL ball, right? Like in the lead up to the draft.
You would think, man. Yeah, I don't know what they were. I don't know what they were doing at LSU, but I guess it wasn't the same here. No, like man, like Bengals first round picks, usually they're injured or they're god awful, or we find out that they're god awful. Green. Yeah, or they're AJ Green. But honestly, like in the first week of training camp, like he was just showing out, and he was just like that was the impression that AJ Green had left on a lot of Bengals fans in 2011. Like the guy just came in immediately and just assumed the role of a number one receiver, and that was what Jamar Chase looked like for like maybe 3 or 4 practices, and everyone got their hopes up. And then he started dropping a bunch of passes. And then they carried into the preseason. And you're thinking, okay, this has to be something like mental at this point. It's just a mental block. And unfortunately, like when you're a young guy, you're not really used to NFL media, I guess. You don't really know how to kind of word your way around some of these answers that could be revealing. And if you're struggling and you say something very open and genuine, you have Mike Florio kind of running with it and getting a bunch of clicks off of it. So I think he'll learn how to kind of avoid the situation again. He actually, I think he quote tweeted Florio earlier today.
I saw that like a couple minutes ago. Yeah.
So that's just the personality that Chase has. He's just open about himself. He was drafted and immediately said, like, I'm going to break every receiving record for the Bengals. So the confidence is not lacking. It was just, I think, him just shaking off some rust. And as soon as he gets one catch and is tackled once in an actual NFL game, I think those jitters will finally kind of evaporate.
All right, week 2 then, huh?
Yeah.
Sorry. But yes, his drop issue wasn't just in the preseason. You mentioned that it occurred in camp. I remember, people breathlessly reported on his drops immediately after the first preseason game, right? Because he had 2 drops in the first preseason game, and then he goes back into camp, and he has like a big drop in the end zone or something like that, if I'm remembering the timeline correctly. And so that's
the first preseason game. He just caught a screen, and the second preseason game he dropped all 3 of his targets, and then he dropped this 2 targets in the practice afterwards.
That's it, yeah. So, but it's not just 4 drops and 5 targets or whatever, right? Or 5 drops and 6 targets, whatever it is. It also occurred in practices and in camp.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit because I think there's some depth here too. I liked Auden Tate. Other Michael Thomas, fine, whatever. Stanley Morgan Stanley, kind of an interesting guy. What do you feel about kind of the depth of that unit, knowing that the Bengals start 3 receivers and not 2?
Auden Tate is a fantastic number 4 receiver. They're like, whenever he's on the field, people are like, why isn't this guy playing more? And it's because he runs at the speed of a tree. But I think he has also kind of improved some of that explosion, however much he can. Like, at the end of the day, he's still at most like a 4.55 guy probably at that size. But coming in for about 10, 15 snaps a game and giving you a contested catch specialist, I think is fine. Mike Thomas is your other backup primary receiver who I think is fine in that role. He knew Zach Taylor in his days with the Rams, but he's a little bit more of an athlete. I think he's going to back up T. Higgins at the other receiver spot, but he's also going to be used a lot for special teams. Stanley Morgan, I really liked coming out of Nebraska, and he's just kind of stuck on as just primarily a special teamer. But I guess he's like your backup slot right now, and I don't expect him to really do anything as a receiver in his career, but as a special teamer, I think he's pretty damn good.
Yeah, I like Stanley Morgan coming out of Nebraska too. So a bunch of people that I liked in the draft on the Bengals. It just seems to be how it goes. All right, let's talk about the defense. First, before we do anything, let's talk a little bit about Lou Anarumo as a defensive coordinator. When I was on your podcast with the Puppets, forgot the name already, feel free to plug it right after you listen to my question. You mentioned that you were not super confident, or you kind of implied that you're not super confident in what Anarumo does.
Yeah, so definitely listen to the number 1 Bengals podcast with Puppet host Daniel McDuke and Dr. Hosey, the Electric Smoji. But Lou Anarumo, yes, Lou Ferrigno, kind of looks like Lou Ferrigno a little bit, was like the Bengals' 7th choice as defensive coordinator, and didn't get hired until I think February 24th of that offseason, so right before the combine. I don't really know who he is or what his overall plan on defense is. There are some Bengals fans that'll tell you, like, schematically he does fine, but he just never really had the personnel, and that's definitely true to an extent. Like, their defensive tackles last year were Xavier Williams, I think, Christian Covington, something like that. So they said, okay, we need to basically redo this entire position group, trade for BJ Hill, sign Larry Ogunjobi. Personnel right now is fine. I think you look at the entire defense and you don't see like a glaring like red flag liability hole necessarily, but there's not a lot of playmakers either. So it does come down to how does the scheme put his guys in the best position to limit big plays, because allowing big plays has been a problem for this defense for the last 3 or 4 years. But thankfully, I think he does have a good fit of personnel with what he wants to do schematically. He's one of the few defense coordinators now that likes to run some of these single high coverages, because the rest of the league is going into more of these cover 2 and cover 4 looks. But he has a really good deep field, center field safety and a really good box safety. And I think he's now got a cornerback room that's full of guys that can deploy more into zone coverage. It's just a matter of does he have the pass rushers to win one-on-one situations, or does he have to blitz more than he wants to?
All right, well, let's talk about the pass rush for a second. So, nose tackle DJ Reader, nose tackle Josh Tupou, nose tackle Tyler Shelvin, sort of a nose tackle BJ Hill, Brown's nose tackle, but in the body of a 3 technique, Larry Ogunjobi. Mm-hmm. Is there going to be an interior pass rush?
I think that's what they're counting on with Ogunjobi. I always thought it was weird that the Browns used him at nose tackle. He was fine as a run defender, but I think he tested really explosively coming out of Charlotte. And he was pretty productive there too. So I think he is relishing this role to be more of a pass rusher, because they didn't really have that for him in Cleveland. And I think BJ Hill has played most of his snaps as a B-gap defender with the Giants, but I think also coming out of NC State, he was billed more as a nose tackle. So there's not a lot of depth at 3 technique, especially in the post-Geno Atkins world, even though Geno hasn't been the same player since 2019 or something like that. But I don't know how much they're going to count on DJ Reader to also supplement a pass rush. I don't know how much you can expect him to do that. I think it really is just putting it in the hands of Ogunjobi. And they also kind of move Sam Hubbard inside sometimes on passing downs to give him some sort of a boost. But that is a position to look for, like long term. Like, do they have a long term solution at this position? Because Ogunjobi and Hill are only under contract for this upcoming season.
Yeah, that NC State defensive line was crazy. But I think both of those defensive tackles were billed as NFL nose tackles. So, of course, the Giants, who only have nose tackles, sort of kind of like the Bengals, I guess, ended up grabbing B.J. Hill. So that pass rush, if someone gets hurt, is there a third edge rusher?
They don't really have a third edge rusher right now. Like, they had Joseph Asai and then he tore his meniscus in the first preseason game. They saw undrafted free agent Darius Hodge out of Marshall kind of pop off. He began training camp as like a linebacker, but then they said, let's try you out at edge rusher. And then he was really good in the first preseason game, and then he continued to have a solid preseason. So he's, I guess right now, they're starting nickel rusher, or maybe their backup right there. So if something happens to Sam Hubbard or Trey Hendrickson, it's going to be him and fourth-round pick Cam Sample. They got this guy named Wyatt Ray off of waivers after final cuts, but he's been a journeyman in his 3 years. So depth at defensive end is looking very shoddy. They have this other guy, Khalid Kareem, who's on IR. He'll be back in like week 4, but he was more of a run defender at Notre Dame anyways, and he didn't really show anything last year as a rookie. So they really need Hendrickson and Hubbard to develop more as pass rushers, which kind of has me being a little bit pessimistic on that front.
Do you think Noah Spence is going to be like a game day, because they get 2 practice squad elevations on game day? Do you think Noah Spence is going to be one of them?
Maybe. I think it was notable how they brought him in so late in camp, and he has a connection with defensive assistant Mark Duffner from their time in Tampa Bay. But if Noah Spence is your answer, then you don't really have an answer, I guess.
Right. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Hendrickson and Hubbard. So Zimmer mentioned, I think he was like, they have Hendrickson and they've got that defensive end from Ohio State that I really liked, which he didn't name him, but that's how Zimmer talks. Sam Hubbard, third-round pick out of Ohio State. Trey Hendrickson, splash free agent, I guess. The Vikings were pursuing him, so obviously the Vikings thought something of him, but we're out on him for whatever reason. I suspect the reason is because they didn't want to pay him before they paid Danielle Hunter, not because Hendrickson's contract demands were too much for the Vikings, but a concern because his production might be unsustainable, something that I think both PFF and film grinders like Brandon Thorne pointed out as a potential concern with Hendrickson. What's your level of confidence in these two?
So the Bengals' whole propaganda with Hendrickson was that he actually finished his pressures, unlike Carl Lawson last year, even though we all know that sacks is not a good way to look at actual pass rushing production in terms of that. But they signed
he's
him.
A good finisher is the spin then.
He is a good finisher because he had Cam Jordan take away some of those some attention there on the defensive line. Hendrickson doesn't have another dominant defensive lineman to pair with him. If you want to call that DJ Reader, be my guess, but that's not going to be me. That's so tough. He needs to just create havoc and pressure on his own. And I remember liking him coming out of college, out of what was like Florida International or something like that. He was athletic, but like that explosion is not necessarily there. He just kind of wins off hustle and effort, which is fine if he's like your second or third guy, but like their second or third guy is Sam Hubbard, and that's exactly also how he wins. He's like the same exact athlete at the same size, and he wins in very similar ways. So they're going to be fine setting the edge. I think both of those guys are fine with that, but it's like, who is going to be the guy who creates these pressures so that one of these guys can finish? So I'm not at all expecting 13.5 sacks from Trey Hendrickson this year. I would be very pleased if he gets on the north side of like 7, honestly.
On the north side of 7. All right, so great pessimistic view. It'll be interesting because we don't know how good Rashad Hill is at left tackle. So Sam Hubbard, I assume, is going to be lining against him more often than not. And if Rashad Hill is losing to Sam Hubbard, that tells you to maybe accelerate the timeline for first-round pick Christian Darrisaw, I think, is maybe a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so linebackers, Logan Wilson had a good season. Don't know anything about any of these other guys. I remember liking Akeem Davis-Gaither, App State, I want to say.
Yep.
And I thought he was like versatile, right? Because he can blitz, right? And then Jermaine Pratt, I think, is starting.
Yes. So Pratt and Wilson are your starters. Davis Gaither, he was billed, I guess, as versatile because he was more like an overhang defender at App State. He was like a positionless player, and he sometimes rushed the passer off the edge.
Oh, you always get that from like the group of five linebackers. They're like,
right.
Yeah, he played over the slot, which you can do in the group of five.
So for the most part, like him and Wilson were just used as like these nickel linebackers that would sometimes blitz, and they would either blitz A gaps, like they would sugar A gaps, or they would drop back into coverage on third down. I think Davis Gaither is going to retain that role this year, and Wilson is just kind of developed into like their 3-down starter. I think he's wearing the green dot, so he's going to be making the calls and checks and whatnot. Pratt has been here for now 3 years, and he started last year, and he was pretty. I mean, he was terrible, but they also didn't really have any defensive tackles in front of them. So they're counting on just the depth and the bodies in front of Pratt to kind of help him out. And yeah, so they have Davis Gaither as one of their main backups. Marcus Bailey out of Purdue from a couple years ago. He was talented, but he's always been injured. He's also going to be backing them up. And then they have Jordan Evans, who is basically a special teams guy. So they're really just counting on Wilson to just keep improving. And this is year 3 for Pratt. And if he doesn't really do anything, they're probably going to make some investment in that position group next year.
All right. So how do you feel about that kind of lineup against a fairly untested but somewhat athletic, guard group, and then of course CJ Ham, who's probably, I don't know, like the 3rd best blocking fullback in the NFL, something like that. There's only like 15 of them.
Yeah. So I still have nightmares of last year when the Browns ran all over these linebackers, and also part of that was because
different quality of offensive line there.
That is true. But honestly, I don't even think it would have mattered because Wilson and Pratt and Josh Bynes at the time, they just looked completely lost. And like you have to assume that another year in the system they have more comfortability in there. But I think these guys are fine athletes in space, which is more than you could say about Cincinnati linebackers in like the last decade. I think Wilson is the best combination of an athlete and also a guy who knows where to be, has spatial awareness. Like that's just a rare combination for a Bengals linebacker. So it really is just like counting on him to just be the best 3rd-down linebacker in Bengals, or 3rd-round linebacker in Bengals history. So the Vikings interior offensive line is not really the strength of that team. So I think they can do a good job of keeping with the flow of the plays and doing their best to keep Dalvin Cook between the hashes.
I'm trying to remember, like, there's like a bunch of linebackers that ran 4.7s or slower, right? It was like Vincent Ray,
4.7 is generous.
Tyler Matakevich, Perfect, of course. Although Perfect, that one was weird, right? Because like you never knew if he like cared enough about the workout for that workout to matter.
Paul Dawson as well. Like
PJ Dawson, Paul Dawson, yeah. TCU undersized linebacker that everyone assumed was fast and then wasn't. All right, let's talk about the secondary. So Trey Waynes is hurt, will not be playing. Former Viking, that's a pity. Eli Apple from New Orleans, Chidobe Awuzie Cheeto from Dallas, Mike Hilton from Pittsburgh. How are these guys going to have any chemistry?
Oh, man. So Awuzie
and Darius Phillips, who has his moments.
Yes. So Darius Phillips lost the starting job to Eli Apple. And for what everyone knows about Eli Apple, it doesn't really bode well for Darius Phillips, who's always been kind of up and down. Like he can.
Yeah, he is. I was very careful in my words.
Like he has ball skills, but he also has the ability to get burned by Odell Beckham and give up 150 yards in this single game. So apparently Eli Apple's looked decent in camp. He's been injured a lot as well, but he's done enough, I guess. He played under Lou and Arumo when they were both with the Giants, so there's some familiarity there. Awuzie is widely regarded as the MVP on the defensive side in training camp, and we're going to find out really quickly if that's because he looks really good or it's because he's been going up against Jamar Chase for the entirety of training camp, which has been the case. Like those two have been battling in training camp, and I honestly think I like Awuzie. I think he's fine, but like right now, it's him and Eli Apple, and you obviously don't trust Eli Apple, so all your eggs are in this Chidobe Awuzie basket. At least they have Mike Hilton in the slot.
Okay, so Mike Hilton's weird, right? Because he was a remarkable blitzing corner for Pittsburgh. He helped that really blitz-heavy scheme go. He always struck me as like kind of okay in coverage. He didn't strike me as somebody – like I think he's an upgrade over Mackenzie Alexander, but he didn't strike me as somebody that like – unless you're implementing a very similar system, and maybe the Bengals are, right? They run a bunch of cover one that gives them opportunities to blitz. Maybe you've got Jesse Bates up top handling whoever's in the slot. I don't know, but it just seemed like if you're going to pay for Mike Hilton, you got to have Mike Hilton in a Mike Hilton system.
That has to be the case. Like they need to create as much pressure as possible because they have questions in their front four. And you're kind of right. Like he was in the perfect scheme for what he was best at with Pittsburgh. And I think he just kind of took a much better deal than whatever Pittsburgh offered him. And by all accounts, like they love him in the locker room and stuff like that. But we haven't really seen a lot of him in training camp, or we don't really know. Like, no, it's been really underreported, I think, for like how much he's doing. I think all the attention has been on either Waynes when he's out there or Wouzier. So yeah, I think honestly, it's a good point. Like we talk about Hilton a lot as the blitzer, and that's the strength of his game. But in terms of just coverage in the slot, I guess it's more of an unknown. And I don't know how much that Pittsburgh successfully managed to hide it, but he's probably going to go up against Jefferson a little bit in the slot whenever he's moved in there. So he's going to be put to the test pretty early.
All right, so Jesse Bates, here's my take. In 2019, was very good in coverage, was very bad against the run. 2020 started out the exact same way. Then in the middle of the season, got burned a little bit, but got really good against the run. And then by the end of the season, was both of those things. Was really good against the run, was really good against the pass. Who is Jesse Bates?
I think he's one of the handful of like truly elite like center field safeties, but there's only one Earl Thomas and one Ed Reed in whatever time frame they're playing. Like guys who have that range and have those ball skills, but also have the ability to consistently make plays against the run. And that was a weakness of Bates. You can go back to Wake Forest, and that was a weakness against him. He was never really that much of a form tackler, and he kind of popped off as a rookie a few years ago. I mean, like was in the running for Defensive Rookie of the Year, like the first half of the season. Then he kind of fell off. 2019, you kind of alluded to, was extremely up and down, which kind of made 2020 that much more surprising or that much more satisfying to watch. Like he was the most consistent he's been in his 3 years, but there's never really been a question of how adept he is in coverage and how quickly he can react to some of these throws down the sideline. Like I think that's part of the reason why defenses are kind of going away from these coverages. Not only are offensive coordinators figuring out how to beat him, but they don't have like these free safeties that can cover both sides of the field and be a true center fielder. But I think Bates is one of the few guys in the league that truly has that range, and I think he's developed nicely as a run defender. So you don't have to really worry about him kind of making those game-saving tackles.
It was interesting when the Vikings extended Harrison Smith $16 million a year. Most of it's fake money, but my take was that Harrison Smith is still a good safety. He's no longer a top 5 safety. And then someone was like, well, name 5 safeties better than him. So I was like, well, all of the great safeties are gone, right? Like I think we're, as you just alluded to in terms of like the way that we've moved on from single high coverages, I think there's just less safety talent in the league right now.
Right.
And so it was actually a little bit difficult for me because I don't know if Tyrann Mathieu is better. Maybe he is, but I'd say, Derwin James is better, hopefully, right? And then you're just kind of in this weird zone where I'm like, do I trust Jesse Bates after that amazing year that he just had to be able to kind of repeat it? I don't know. Like Anthony Harris didn't really repeat his amazing year, so I don't know if I can say that. You run through the safeties a little bit, and maybe Harrison Smith is like number 5, right? I think that Jesse Bates is in a really good environment to just, because Justin Simmons, kind of the same deal, mm-hmm. where if I was going to put Justin Simmons up against like Eric Berry, Eric Weddle, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, all playing at the same friggin' time, and I put up 2020 Justin Simmons, 2019 Justin Simmons up against them, I'd say, he's behind them. But right now, he might be number 1 in the league. Jesse Bates has got a lot of opportunity to take that spot, right, to be the top safety, in part because there's not a competitor, right, for that spot. So do you think that he can make that and be consistent in that way?
I think he can. And I think his main competition is Justin Simmons at this point. And I think that's why he wanted to wait, and he still wants to wait as long as possible to get the most amount of money. I think it's probably more on the side of true that the Bengals are kind of lowballing him right now and not offering him as much real money. No, exactly, right? Shocking information. But I think there is a point to be made that he may not have as much leverage as he think he has. Like, he's probably going to get franchise tag next year if they don't come to an agreement in the next 72 hours. And it is up to him to kind of repeat what he did last year. I think he's definitely trajecting into that area of being at this level for many years to come. But it is a risk on their part. Like, are they expecting second team All Pro for the next 5 years from him? I think it's definitely in the likely realm of possibility, but they haven't really had a player like this since, I guess, AJ Green, like a guy who's up and coming as a legitimate perennial Pro Bowl All-Pro talent.
There's so many good players throughout Bengals history, even recent history, that you could make comparisons to, and you're always going to AJ Green. There's no Geno Atkins, right? There's no Ocho Cinco, right? It's just AJ Green.
Well, I'm looking at the timeline. Like they legitimately haven't had an All-Pro player since 2015, and that was like Geno Atkins and like Adam Jones as a returner and stuff like that. But like a guy who in his first 3 years, at the end of the third year, like we know this guy is legit, and they always preach like to be a Bengal, it's to be consistent, it's to be healthy, it's all these different type of buzzwords, and he is everything that they want to keep, and now they're kind of forced to either pay him a contract that they're not accustomed to offering, or have to play the franchise tag game with him and potentially watch him go succeed for the rest of his career somewhere else. So I think he is that talented, but it is just a matter of can he repeat what he did last year.
All right, so I want to wrap this up before it runs an entire hour, so I've got a little bit of time. I'm not going to be able to, let's be honest. But special teams real quick, I think so Kevin Huber, I looked him up on PFF, still don't know what to make of him. He's the punter. Evan McPherson, really liked him as a kicker. Thought he was probably behind Jose Borregales as a kicker, but I don't know anything about evaluating special teams, and I could be wrong. Bengals drafted him 5th round. Borregales goes undrafted to the Patriots. Maybe that says something. I don't know. Tell me about these two and what impact they have on special teams.
We finally get to their best position group on the team. Clark Harris.
This kicker's a rookie. You don't know anything.
Oh, I know. He's their best player for sure, 100%. He's going to make a 65-yard kick this season. I'm actually very confident in that. I don't think they've attempted a legitimate 60-yard kick in maybe my lifetime. They never had the kicker to do so. Like they had Mike Nugent, who power was never his strength. Randy Bullock, accuracy was never his strength. That's why they made McPherson the only kicker drafted in this class. He has that, like, he was making 40-yard field goals and he was clearing the net. I think they are going to give him opportunities this year to do that, which could bite them in the butt if they're less aggressive on 4th down, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But Kevin Huber has rarely messed up as a punter, and Clark Harris has never missed a snap. So all the confidence in the world.
When you say never missed a snap, do you mean has been healthy or has never missed the accuracy of his long snapping?
I think he did miss a game, but he's never he was never inaccurate with his long snapping.
You realize why I had to ask.
Yeah.
All right. So time to predict a score. I don't know, man. Go for it. What's your score predict? We don't even remember. We have a bunch of guests predict scores. We never go back and check to see if they got it right.
So the good guys are 3-point dogs coming back. Right. With their quarterback returning from a 9-month hiatus.
The good guys is fairly relative. I think these are the 2 most arrested teams in the league.
two of the most snake bitten as well.
It's true. Yeah.
I've been really pessimistic this entire show, so I'm going to say 27-23 Bengals.
But it still gets the under, right? The Bengals
still gets the under.
Cover a plus 10 or something like that. They cover by 10, so you could buy some points for the teaser and still hit the under by half a point. Incredible. I'm going to say you're wrong. I said 24-20 in your show. I'll stick with that. Cool. Is there anything you want to plug? Anything you want to add that we missed? I hope not. This is pretty thorough. And anything you just want to shout out?
Nah, it's Cincy Jungle for game coverage. I think I'll be at the game. Doing whatever. I haven't been to a game since like 2016, so it'd be interesting to go back there. But yeah, CincyJungle.com for all the Bengals coverage. Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast is the podcast for Cincy Jungle, and yeah, that's about it.
Cool. Thanks so much for coming on, dude.
All right, let's go to the mailbag, and the first question is from Alexander, who asks, aside from Kirk Cousins and the QB position, what player and what position group will have the most impact on the Vikings win and a Vikings loss on Sunday, and you cannot choose the position group of the player you select?
Right, so I would not be able to say Justin Jefferson is the most important and the wide receivers are the most important. That makes sense. Fair
Correct.
enough. That's not my answer. My answer is the cornerback group, I think, will be the most important in terms of determining the likelihood of a Vikings win, because how they do is such an unknown that if we get baseline performances from everybody, we can expect, the receivers to play well and stuff like that. So it's kind of a tough question to answer because like if the receivers play poorly, that's worse than if the cornerbacks play poorly. But I think from the perspective of our expectations and the range of outcomes we should reasonably expect, I think the corners are going to have to hit the high end of that range more so than the receivers, than the offensive line, than the defensive line, etc. As for the individual player, obviously, Patrick Peterson, but outside of that position group, I would pick Danielle Hunter. I would say that it's unlikely, that a defensive end is the most important player on a team in a game, just from the way that these things work out. Obviously, like safety tends to be more important, but I just think that if the Vikings get a lot out of Danielle Hunter, it'll change the protection scheme so substantially that it'll allow them to get a lot of quick pressure. That'll keep the throws short. That'll prevent deep passes. And deep passes are the thing I worry the most about with the construction of this Vikings defense and the lack of speed that they have in the secondary. So I would like them to limit the likelihood that there is going to be, a lot of explosives. So I think Danielle Hunter playing well, that also allows them to do at least some shutdown work on Joe Mixon. So that I think is, if he hits the high end of his range of outcomes, that's like a 4-sack day, right? If he hits the high end of his range of outcomes. And I think it would be very difficult for the Vikings to lose. Not impossible, obviously. I mean, we saw a full year of Jared Allen getting 22 sacks in a 5-win season or something like that, right? So it's not impossible, right? But I think it would be very hard against this Bengals team for the Vikings to lose if they also get 4 sacks from Danielle Hunter.
Anton asks, what will leave us as the most disappointed on Sunday? Like what could potentially be what could be the biggest disappointment this Sunday?
Greg Joseph. I think if you lose the game because of a couple of missed kicks, I think that will leave you disappointed, right? Because if the defense doesn't work out for whatever reason, if the cornerbacks, falter or whatever, that was foreseeable, right? The Vikings made a bunch of bets that are pretty reasonable to make, and it just didn't go their way, right? You're just all right, I get signing Patrick Peterson, maybe you overpaid him a little bit, but I get it, right? And it didn't work out. Fine. Okay, I get it. But the kicker is just this was your plan all along? You could have traded for a kicker. I know that hasn't historically worked out, but this guy? Really? Greg Joseph? He's kicked once. It was in 2018 or something. This guy, a 76% field goal rate? Really? That would just be you did all this work. You got all these players in. You brought back Everson Griffin. You found a way to put Danielle Hunter on the field despite, how worried he was about his contract. Kirk Cousins played, fine or whatever. And the kicker that we expected to be bad was bad. Screw you. That I think is the most likely way to end Sunday disappointed.
I mean, the Vikings are down 2, and in a 2-minute drill, Kirk Cousins all of a sudden becomes the most efficient quarterback in Vikings history, brings it down the field, is doing his best. All players are just hitting on all cylinders. Things are working great for this comeback. Looks good. Justin Jefferson gets tackled with 3 seconds left to go out of bounds by the 15. Then Greg Joseph comes out to get the game-winning kick and just shanks it hard. The ball might as well have just gone backwards at this point. That sort of thing. That'd be it.
It's so foreseeable. That's just why it's so disappointing. Dude, there were 4 rookie kickers that were picked up this year. You grabbed Riley Patterson?
Yep. That's where we're at. Raul asks, Andre Patterson calls Everson Griffin his, quote, binky. Who is the binky in your professional life? And is that person also 6'3" and 270 pounds?
I don't think I know anybody in my professional life who's 6'3", 270 pounds.
I mean, I'm
6'5", right?
Yeah, I'm bigger in both respects. So even with dieting, I'm bigger than that.
Yeah. So you if you were my binky, which you're not, so don't worry, you would be the closest, right? I guess the closest to a binky in my professional life is my editor. Shout out to Adam Hansman. I think he's because I think what binky here means security blanket, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So It's probably my editor.
Also, number 2, who is the most likely first-time Pro Bowler on this roster?
So I went through the players on the roster that had a Pro Bowl to anticipate this question, and I was kind of surprised, right? Like I was like, maybe it's CJ Ham, but CJ Ham actually made a Pro Bowl in 2019, for the 2019 season, I should say. I know Kirk Cousins has made a Pro Bowl, although I had to confirm, right? I had to make sure, and so I couldn't pick him. And then the rest of the players that you think of as pretty good have all made the Pro Bowl, right? Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, Daniil Hunter, Harrison Smith, obviously Patrick Peterson. I guess with the way the preseason went, you could say Bashad Breeland, but I mean, he did give up a huge one to Tyreek Hill, so that seems unlikely to me. Maybe Michael Pierce, based off of, kind of how well he did in training camp and stuff like that, based off of what I saw. Maybe Dalvin Tomlinson, he got some attention, but it's really hard, I think, for a defensive tackle group, especially one that specializes in run stuffing, to make the Pro Bowl in a defensive tackle, class, in a defensive tackle year, where in the NFC you also have like Aaron Donald, right? It would be difficult for either of them to make it, especially among nose tackles. I mean, Kenny Clark seems more likely, right, in the same division, or Eddie Goldman, right? I think maybe the most likely could be Brian O'Neill. He could prove me wrong about this contract. I think he's got a lot of, upside from a talent perspective, that he could prove that he's better than Ryan Ramczyk and make it above, players like David Bakhtiari and Teron Armstead. This is probably a year that Andrew Whitworth finally doesn't make the Pro Bowl or something like that. And that's tough too, right? Because Tristan Wirfs also, could make the Pro Bowl. So that one's tough, but I think Brian O'Neill is not limited as much by his position as Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson are. So I think it's probably him. I'm trying to think, Devin Cook already made a Pro Bowl. I don't think Oli Udoh is going to take that tremendous of a step forward. It'd be awesome if he did, but there's already a couple of guards that would just be difficult for, like Zach Martin and Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. I think I have to go with Brian O'Neill, unless I'm missing somebody big.
I mean, it's going to be Greg Joseph, and you just need to accept that.
It would be perfect. Yeah. Jordan Berry.
Just why not? Michael Lacoste asks, is there a reason they only protected 2 practice squad players this week as opposed to the full comp of 4 that they are allotted?
So this question gave me a lot more trouble than I expected. I was like trying to research, because I know that you can only elevate a player from the practice squad to the game day roster so many times before you have to add him to the 53. And I was like, I wonder if it's the same with practice squad players, because you're effectively limiting their freedom of movement from a labor perspective in a way that they don't have much control over. And so maybe there's also protections there. But I looked it up, and as far as I could tell, there are no limits on the number of players, or the number of times you can protect a player on the practice squad, which surprised me. I thought that was wrong. I kept looking. I did not find a limit. So if someone does find evidence that there is a limit, please tell me. But no, it doesn't look like that, because that would be a pretty good answer, right? Is that they've got a number of players that they want, but because they would be limited by the number of times they can protect that player, which again, I really thought was the case, they would want to kind of save that for other weeks or something like that. But no, that's not the case. They protected Sean Mannion and Amir Abdullah, by the way. Nearly every other team, if not every other team, protected 4 players. The 2 things I can think of are, one, it gives them some future contract leverage in negotiations, right? Because an agent can say, hey, you're paying my guy the regular practice squad salary. You keep protecting him, so you clearly think he's better than at least 12 other players on the practice squad. You should either just, cut the BS and just put him on the roster, or at least pay him more than a traditional practice squad guy, because next year we'll remember this. And when we negotiate a futures contract with a team, we're going to go to another team that's going to give us a better chance, or at least respect the fact that they clearly recognize us as better players than you do, right? So that could be one thing. The other thing is they don't want to let other teams know, I guess, that these are the guys that we like, because there is a window right after the game and before the next game week starts that you could sign with another team. And a smart enough agent will take advantage of that window. And and say, hey, the Vikings really like this guy's potential. Look how many times they've protected him. They really like this guy's potential. He's shadow depth on their roster. They're going to activate him as soon as it's possible. If you really want, a good running back on your roster, if you really want a good tight end or whoever it is I happen to represent today, you should just get this guy now and offer him a salary between the hours of 4 a.m. or was it midnight Eastern on 12:01 a.m. Eastern on Monday morning and 4 p.m. Tuesday. So you offer an NFL salary and put him on the 53. I guess technically the other reason is if you're elevated and protected, you don't get to sign. You don't lose your protection status in that window. Whereas if you are protected, you lose your protection status in the window. So because they're only going to elevate two, and it almost certainly is going to be Sean Mannion and Amir Abdullah on game day, those two can't do that. Whereas if they did do those two, those additional two, not only would teams know, but they would be able to actually use that window to negotiate with another team. So those are the two things I can think of is contract leverage and hiding from the rest of the league. But the Vikings do a lot of roster shenanigans and stuff like that. For a while, they kept a secret, essentially 11-person practice squad by cutting someone halfway through the week from the practice squad and adding the other person back in. But both would still get their full practice squad salary for the week. They do, but that is really extra. So I don't know what it is, but it is unusual.
Nathan asks, over under 5 sacks by the Vikings this week.
It's a pretty weak interior. You heard me kind of dunk on it a couple of times in the show or in the interview with John Sheeran. He thinks it's better than I gave it credit for. I am still skeptical. Those tackles are a little bit better. Danielle Hunter happens to hit some of their weak points. We discussed that. I still don't. 5 sacks is a lot. Burrow gets rid of the ball really quickly, and sacks are more on the quarterback than anybody else. So I think it's under, probably by a fair amount. I think that the Vikings will win mostly through pressure if it comes from their defensive line. If they win because of their defensive line, it'll be more through pressure than it will be through sacks. So I'm going to take the under.
Josh Wells asks, how much of Bradbury's below-average play is on him versus how much can be attributed to the revolving doors he's had at guard and picking up some of those missed assignments?
So we get a version of this question a lot for whatever offensive lineman that people want to not struggle is struggling, right? I remember this question for Matt Khalil. I remember this question for Pat Elflein. I even remember this question for Phil Lodeholt. And I mean, honestly, that question did make sense because I thought Phil Lodeholt was playing well. But yeah, I've heard this question a lot. TJ Clemmings, I've heard, which I think that person was really hoping, right? I don't think they really thought that.
That's some real fandom. None of this that is the hashtag faith sort of guy.
Yeah. Hey, TJ Clemmings looks like garbage. Is it not his fault? Tell me it's not his fault. Right? I get it.
You're no, hot, steaming garbage.
But yeah, and the thing is, some of the kind of more objective-ish, I don't want to say any statistic is objective, but the statistics that are treated as objective, maybe is the best way to put it, like pressures and sacks given up and hits given up and stuff like that, they can be impacted by those sorts of things. But for the most part, not really. And that gets taken into account a little bit in terms of grade. So if someone is grading really poorly, it is almost never because their supporting cast is hurting them, even on the offensive line. And if I have talked to a couple of offensive line consultants and coaches, right? So people who've coached in the NFL in the past, and I've asked kind of versions of this question, and they say that it is something you have to take into account, but you can just evaluate a player. You can figure out 95 to 99% of the time. One guy said 95, one guy said 99. What their assignment is and whether or not they are tasked with being helped or whether or not they need to make a decision to help. And for the most part, especially at center, what you kind of have to do is you kind of have to ignore when your teammate is struggling. Not all the time, right? If you can help, you can help. But like, if you're engaged with someone and you see, like, if you're engaged with Michael Brockers and you see Aaron Donald just swim past Ezra Cleveland, you have to forget that that happened because you're still blocking Michael Brockers. And if you slip in your concentration for a moment, now it's two players chasing your quarterback instead of one. So for the most part, actually, no. And when I'm watching Garrett Bradbury, and I'm not saying this because I'm some sort of offensive line savant, I'm a dummy when it comes to the offensive line. If you're watching Garrett Bradbury, you and I can both figure out with a high degree of certainty whether or not he screwed up on that play. And he screws up a lot on a lot of plays. So no, I think it's not. And I did a study a little bit on what Matt Khalil's PFF grade is based off of the PFF grade of the guard next to him, based off of the number of guards he'd had next to him over the course of his career, because this came up a couple of times. And I say study, it wasn't that rigorous, but I did take a look at it. And then I took a look at tackles across the league that had good guards and poor guards. And I looked at good by PFF standards and good by contract standards. So front offices think that this guard is good because they pay him a lot, and PFF thinks this guard is good because he has a high grade. And I looked at whether or not there was a relationship, a game-to-game correlation, and a season-to-season correlation based off of the person next to him. Now, this isn't center guard. This is tackle guard. And there was virtually none. It existed by a small amount. It was statistically significant. There was a relationship at the season level for PFF guard grades and PFF tackle grades that could be explained by that, but it was very small. And Garrett Bradbury is like near the bottom of the league in terms of PFF grade. So like it would not explain very much of it. And this is kind of how I want to get across some things in my discussions about PFF, because it's not gospel, right? And I talk all the time about stuff I disagree with PFF. Like, for example, that first preseason game, I talked about Wyatt Davis and how much I disagreed with the grade there. So I'm not saying that, that they're gospel, but I do want to say this. If in an appropriate sample size, like 500 snaps for an offensive lineman, if they say that guy is one of the worst in the league, that guy is probably one of the worst in the league. It would take a mistake of extraordinary proportions for that guy to even be below average, much less anything else. Same with the top of the league. Like maybe the difference between ranking 1 and 2 is not that big, and maybe, the guy that they ranked 5th is actually the best or whatever. But like, it is virtually impossible that the guy that they ranked 31st is actually 2nd. Like that doesn't happen. So, and remember, PFF like has like professional coaches, like former NFL coaches, former college coaches, current college coaches audit their grades. So like, it's not as if they're just making a bunch of these guesses. There's a coaching network that goes into their grading system. So long story made short, the answer to your question is no. Or I should say very little, because you asked how much of Bradbury's below average play is on him versus how much can be attributed to the revolving doors he's at a guard. Most of it's on him. Very little of it has to do with the guards next to him.
Next question is going to be from Professor Poop, who asks, with the preseason all said and done, there will be a lot of discussion about who deserves Mr. Mankato. However, I'm not really concerned with that. What I am interested in is who would win the esteemed Professor Poop's poopiest preseason performance prize.
That's incredible. Who won this year's Mr. Mankato? Do we know? Looks like Score North had it out. So the official, no, those are the odds. James, why don't you look for it? I can't find a Mr. Mankato for this year. But the worst preseason the Professor Poop's poopiest preseason performance prize probably goes to Cameron Dantzler, right? Like the easiest thing would be to do is to pick like the 90th person on the roster and say, it's that guy. It's like, it's Warren Jackson or it's Zionde Johnson or whatever, right? No. I think it has to go to somebody that you expected to have a really big role. that kind of fumbled it in terms of his position. And Cameron Dancer was presumed to be the starter that was being challenged by Bashaud Breeland. At the very least, you could say Cameron Dancer was in an equal competition with Bashaud Breeland. My assumption was that Cameron Dancer was ahead in the competition entering the spring training, and that Bashaud Breeland was there to legitimately push him, which is what happened. But instead of being the starter, he fell behind Bashaud Breeland. Well, that's pretty bad, but that's not the worst of it. But then he fell behind Chris Boyd in the depth chart. And that, I think, is really demonstrative of how far he fell. So I think he had the poopiest preseason performance because there are not really any other starters that fell not just to backup, but to backup. So it has to go to Cameron Dancer. James, did you figure out who Mr. Mankato was?
You know, they did not make it easy to figure it out. And I was unable to find the actual listing for Mr. Mankato this year.
Well, they must not have awarded it yet, right?
Best as I can figure, if they did, they decided to keep it a secret.
Oh, good.
It's likely KJ Osborne, but
I could also see Amir Smith-Marset.
Yeah, but nothing was formally announced as far as I could tell. Ethan asks, could we see the Vikings use CJ Ham at tight end in certain packages? Purely as a blocker or underneath option. Obviously, he wouldn't be running down the seam, even though that would be hilarious. I never knew that I needed CJ Ham at tight end until this moment, and I need this. I need this for me.
Ethan, I don't know if you saw any of Adam Thielen's presser or press availability on Monday, but I hope you did, or actually I hope you didn't because it'd be funnier. But Adam Thielen was asked about how nice it is to have pass-catching running backs on the roster to kind of take the pressure off of losing Irv Smith and take the pressure off of the receivers. And his answer was, I think they're so versatile. He's talking about the running backs, specifically Dalvin Cook. But I think they're so versatile. I think every one of those guys has a unique skill set that they're so versatile. They can split out. They can catch the ball. They can run screen passes. They can do what some receivers can do. Even a guy like CJ Ham, what he's able to do when he's able to bring in offense, because he can do so much. He can play tight end. He can play running back. He can play fullback. Again, it's going to be all hands on deck, and those guys are going to be the guys that are going to be big in our offense, moving the ball down the field and scoring points. So you mentioned CJ Ham at tight end. And this is Adam Thielen. He's a football guy. He's on the team. He should know. I think that it is possible that the Vikings use CJ Ham at tight end, but I think a lot of the two tight end sets are just going to be replaced by a two running back set with CJ Ham at fullback. There are some 22 personnel sets too that obviously you couldn't have, which means two running back, two tight end, which means you couldn't have Ham at tight end. But I think that there are probably some plays where they're going to line up Ham in line at the line of scrimmage as a tight end, and he's going to block down. The best opportunity, the best thing you could do off of this is to do a play action tight end leak with him, because that would be funny as hell. Also, that's exactly how Gronk scored his first touchdown of the Thursday night game. Or actually, I think it was the second, where he was getting blocked down, or he was blocking down on DeMarcus Lawrence, saw a slot corner blitz, and then used that to leak out. That was the second touchdown. Actually, the play action tight end leak was a little bit different. That was the first one. So yeah, anyway, so he was blocking down, and then he turns and flips out, and he goes to the end zone. That was at the goal line. So that would be funny with CJ Ham, because who expects CJ Ham to release? They would, because the key to that is that the tight end makes it look like a missed block. And hopefully CJ Ham can make something look like a missed block when it's not. That's my answer. Yes.
Just
question mark.
The idea of CJ Ham lining up in the tight end spot.
It is totally different. That kind of blocking, by the way. It's not like he can block, so just put him there. It is totally different.
Yeah,
it is funny.
Jack Rackham asks, does Greg Joseph make it to the week 2, or doesn't he make it to week 2 on the roster?
I think so. I think if the Vikings had another option, they would have taken it by now. I don't know if he makes it to like week 4, because they might just decide to sign a guy off of a practice squad at that point. Like if he continues to miss, like he has in training camp in the preseason. But I think he makes it to week 2, because if they were confident enough to cut someone week 1, I think they'd be confident enough to cut somebody right as the preseason ended. But I think by week 4, if he continues to miss, the level of, discomfort that you have with like Jose Borregales, the tight end that's on, or the kicker that's on the practice squad of the Patriots. At that point, you're just like, well, I don't want to say it can't be worse, right? Because remember, the Vikings, it can always get worse. But the room for it to get worse is pretty limited, and the Patriots like him enough to put him on the practice squad. Let's grab him.
Also from Jack, let's go to a Reef's wedding etiquette corner,
Jeez.
which is one of my new favorites. My wife's cousin gets married this Sunday. Yeah, I know, don't get me started. At 12 o'clock at high noon. So is it acceptable to have Hulu Live going on mute to watch the game? It's a small wedding, and I will definitely be noticed.
Definitely be noticed.
To be clear, I have no assigned role at the wedding.
Okay, well, that's important because if you're up there, that's a pretty big breach of etiquette, my dude.
Yeah, that becomes a bit of a distraction on the field and off.
Yeah, I think it's not an issue with the reception, but I think the wedding ceremony itself, I shouldn't say not an issue with the reception, but significantly less of an issue with the reception. And the wedding itself is at noon. You're just gonna have to ask a buddy to record that game, man. It's a small wedding, and you'll be noticed. I don't know. James probably included this question because he's got some sort of harebrained scheme concocted.
I do actually have a harebrained scheme.
Okay, hit me with it.
All right, so most weddings, guy shows up, he's wearing a suit, right? Maybe just keep your phone.
Oh, in one of the inside pockets of the suit, and then just flip it out.
No. Let's not be that obvious. Let's almost like Inspector Gadget it with the inside of like the cuff of the jacket, and just like slide it in and out every once in a while to take a look to see what it ends up happening. So like where your hand is on the jacket, just stuff the phone in, and then just extend it out just a little bit. Yep, here comes the phone. All right, yep. That's another Greg Joseph miss. All right, push it back in for a couple of minutes, check it back out. Plus, Sunday weddings are annoying as hell for a number of reasons, let alone the fact that this one's going to be happening at noon. Nobody really wants to be at a Sunday wedding, and I can say this as somebody who DJ'd Sunday weddings. It's miserable. Sunday weddings are small family affairs that the people there they'd much rather either A, be watching football, or B, be at church. But instead, they are at your wedding. You kind of have to take what you can get at that point, because these are not very well attended, because they are Sunday weddings. So I don't know if I would necessarily watch it that much during the ceremony itself, but during the reception, go nuts. Now, all you really have to deal with is your wife's anger. And I feel like that's the bigger problem that you could potentially run into. So maybe run things by her, or spend the $5 for the Hulu Live thing in order to just access the DVR thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, the bigger issue is your wife, not everybody else. The bigger issue is your wife, because you're going to go home with her. And if you have upset her at her cousin's wedding, that is gonna burn for a bit.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think the scheme that James came up with is appropriately dumb, but also don't do it.
Good. The fact that you have my back on this show really is the reason that I feel I feel like I
support each other, James. That's who we are.
A win for one of us is a win for all of us. Nolan Kaler asks, question for a Reefs Presbyterian corner.
Jesus.
Should the Vikings see the light and adopt a no punt policy and the quarterly onside kick sacrament for the 2021 season? Will it be enough to sanctify the offense?
Okay. This is a reference to the fact that Coach Kevin Kelly, who had previously coached Pulaski High in Arkansas, I want to say, had an approach, and he's been written up like a number of times. He's the coach who never punts, right? Who like I just said, never punted, or very, very rarely punted in high school football, and always onside kicked. that is interesting, right? So he goes to Presbyterian College, which I was surprised to learn was an FCS school. I thought it was like maybe a Division II or Division III. He goes to Presbyterian College, and he's immediately implemented this approach. They went up against St. Andrews and demolished them 84 to some irrelevant number, like 24, something like that, 84 to 24. The quarterback threw 10 touchdowns. I do want to add that St. Andrews is an NAIA school, so that's below Division II, below Division III. So it is it would be like if not quite like, but it'd be somewhat similar to if like a group of 5 FBS team took on a Division II team. Like you're expected to dominate, and he did. But they didn't punt. They attempted 11 onside kicks. I think they only recovered one of them. They attempted 5 fourth down conversions. They converted 4 of them. They attempted 6 2-point plays. They converted half of them. One quarterback threw 10 touchdowns. Another one threw 2. 18 players caught at least 1 pass. There were 2 100-yard receivers. The quarterback threw like 50 times with no interceptions. And like that probably tells you everything, because 10 touchdowns to no interceptions is not just a product of having more possessions and running the numbers and deciding that punting is bad. There's very clearly a talent difference here. Like Presbyterian has put like a couple, like 2 or 3 players into the NFL. My understanding is that St. Andrews has not. All of their drills and practices are 11 on 11. They don't do very much one-on-ones. There's they don't really wear pads. There's no tackling. There's no whistles. It's very weird. But I want it to work, and this is the first test. It was a very weak test. He passed the test. We'll see what he does against a real FCS team. Maybe not quite so difficult as James Madison.
That is hard. That is excellence just personified.
Yeah, right. That would be tough. Maybe against like a team in the Ohio Valley Conference or something like that. Missouri Valley Conference.
There you go. And just as a side note, since we mentioned James Madison, it is worth noting that the Cowboys did end up signing Ben DiNucci, our Lord and Savior, as a practice squad member. So he did find a roster. He did find a place to sit, and is just enjoying life on the practice squad now for just a little bit until it's time for him to start.
He's playing the long game. I really appreciate that about him.
That is that and his sidearm are the 2 things I appreciate about him.
Mm-hmm.
We could go for literally hours on the things we appreciate about him, but instead we're going to go over to Arif's psychological trauma corner from Chris, who asks, I found out that there's never been a forfeited NFL game, which just makes it feel more likely the Vikings are going to lose this way now. Do you feel like this is destiny, or have I just been hurt by this team too many times?
Yeah, I had to find out if they're like, because that can't be true, right? There's obviously in the history of the modern NFL, there's never been a forfeited NFL game. But like even if you go back to like the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets or whatever they're called, like even back to before we knew that this would be a league. So I looked it up, and there's one alleged forfeit in 1921. Apparently it's not clear, right? The league schedules of that era, right? Of like, the Pottsford Maroons or whatever they're called. They were pretty fluid. They didn't, I'm reading off the Wikipedia page a little bit, but they're pretty fluid. They're not so easy to kind of figure out why a game was canceled, which is not the same, obviously, as a forfeit, so we don't know who's at fault. But within the NFL rulebook, the forfeiture rules have never been like activated or used because it would like turn somebody's game into a loss as opposed to a cancellation, which eliminates that game from the schedule. And also there's never been a game that has been overturned after the fact. So I guess, but that does, like you say, open up the possibility that the Vikings could be in a unique situation where they've are the first team in NFL history to forfeit a game. And like normally you bring that up and you say, yeah, that does seem very Vikings. I could totally see that they would be the only team in NFL history to forfeit a game. That's very funny that you say that. And then you realize the Vikings are also best positioned to activate the league's new forfeiture rules because they're the least vaccinated team in the league. So yeah, that certainly seems like a big possibility. I will say this though. A forfeiture is not necessarily called because a number of players test positive or considered high risk contacts, right? Like, so if for example, I don't know, Amir Abdullah tests positive and Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison and Kenny Nwangu and CJ Ham, if all of them, and some of those players are vaccinated, some of them are not. So I can't, this wouldn't be the case. But as an example, if they're all considered high-risk contacts and the Vikings are just missing their entire running back room, and at the same time, the same thing is happening in the safety room, right? If that happens, right, that would just be like 10 players or 9 players out of the game. That's all that would be. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's an outbreak. If there's, that's only 2 cases, right? Like, let's say it's, Madison and Metellus, right? That's just 2 cases. And so that doesn't count as an outbreak. So that wouldn't activate the forfeiture rule. That would just lead to the Denver Broncos Kendall Hinton game, except at running back, and like possibly not as bad, right? Like, because like running the ball is not as, I don't want to say it's like easy to do. It's not, but it's not as irreplaceable as throwing the ball is.
Yeah.
And you can move a corner to safety, right? It's possible, right? And so, but like that's not it. What activates the rule is an outbreak, not a certain number of players. And apparently it's actually not that easy to get designated as an outbreak. The Tennessee Titans last year, I think, were an outbreak, but they weren't this year. They were considered a cluster by the NFL. And I think what makes it an outbreak is continuous. And don't like consider this 100% fact. This is me with an opinion. I think what counts as an outbreak from the league's perspective is not necessarily a lot of tests, although I'm sure if there was a ton of positive tests at once, I mean, their first conclusion is probably going to be, hey, did the testing process get contaminated? But if there are a lot of confirmed positive tests at once, that might, like a ton of them, that might be considered an outbreak. But if it continues to happen day after day after day, I think that is more likely to trigger an outbreak. So it actually would be very difficult given the very high vaccination rates across the league, including, relatively speaking, to the population at large, the Vikings. Like the Vikings are more vaccinated than the community that they're in, right? Like that, I think, should always be brought up. But if you get continuous positive tests day after day, then that would be an outbreak, and then the Vikings would forfeit, and then a bunch of players would lose a bunch of money. And I have to imagine that like somebody is going to be thinking about ordering the code red. Hopefully not, right? Like that would be awful, but man, players would be really upset about losing that money.
Can we talk about the Denver thing for just a second? The report that had come out about the
oh
Denver
my god,
game.
Holy crap, I can't believe that. I mean, I can, but Jesus.
Yeah, so the story that came out was regarding the nearly canceled game that the Denver Broncos played, in which, what was the name of their fake quarterback?
Kendall Hinton.
Kendall Hinton played quarterback because the 4 quarterbacks in the quarterback room all had their lanyards that have their little like ID card, so you could like see where you are on, in the facility, if you're too close to people, whatever. So the story that came out was that each of the quarterbacks in the quarterback room put the device in one of the 4 corners in the room, and then they all got together in the middle and started watching film. And this was on camera. And the NFL refused to let them reschedule the game because of this. Like, this was...
well, in part because of it, yeah. But like, if they were going to consider rescheduling the game, this would have removed it from the realm of consideration. Like, this, not only was it originally like, this isn't what the protocols were for, but also, this is just your fault. What the hell, man?
The purest form of the NFL giving a team a spanking. Like, no, you cannot do this. Moving on, you're gonna have to play somebody. Don't care who you've got behind your center, just somebody.
Right. Like, the center will be snapping the ball per NFL rules. Technically, doesn't have to be to a quarterback. You figure that part out yourself.
And be like, I don't care if it's Wildcat. Every play doesn't matter. None of those 4 people can start.
Right. And also that coach you have on the roster, he can't play quarterback either. Because people have tried that in the past. So we made a rule about it. And this rule has already impacted teams. Terrence Newman could not suit up for the Vikings for a full year after he signed a coaching contract. That's just how it is. So that coach that you think can play quarterback, that's good for him.
Yeah. Let's go over to Kenneth Allen, who asks, who are you most interested seeing in real game time Sunday? Or to put it otherwise, who potentially has the most to show on Sunday, whether it be because they didn't play during the preseason or because the level of competition was lower?
Yeah, I think I'll interpret the qualifier broadly as to because there's a high degree of uncertainty surrounding them, right? So that could be Patrick Peterson, who didn't play in the preseason, but I'm going to pick Oli Udoh, who did play a lot in the preseason and played very well in the preseason, often against starters, but not like the best starters, right? Like he didn't play, I don't think he played against DeForest Buckner because I think Buckner went out really quickly in the game and he primarily played on the offense's left side. He didn't play against Denver starting defensive tackles because they just didn't play in that game, and so on. So he didn't actually get that many reps, but he played really well in the preseason. That's not enough. Right. I'm very optimistic about him, obviously, as you can tell from the way that I write and the way that I talk about him in these podcasts for the past couple of weeks. But it is honestly just uncertain. I cannot say that he's a good player until he actually plays. So that's who I'm most interested in seeing. And that's going to be something where I'm probably going to have to watch the game again because it's offensive line stuff. Naturally, my eye follows the ball. I try to watch as much as I can during a game. But if I want to really take a look at him, I'm probably going to have to watch again. But that, I think, is the most intriguing storyline. In terms of like real-time game action, who am I interested in seeing from the perspective of finding out stuff that I might not have known about them? I think maybe Tyler Conklin. Obviously, Daniel Hunter is going to be really interesting. Patrick Peterson is going to be really interesting. The entire defense is going to have like 8 new starters. It's all going to be very interesting, right? But I think Tyler Conklin is going to be the most exciting one to be interesting from the perspective of an unknown, unless Patrick Peterson ends up grabbing a pick or two, right? Unless he plays lights out. It's really just going to be a story. Is he going to be above average, below average, or bad? I don't think we're going to see like elite, right, from him. Tyler Conklin, I think you've got a really broad range of possibilities because the way he played when Kyle Rudolph was out, at least from a production perspective, was really high level. It wasn't like elite. I don't want to say he was like a Darren Waller or anything like that, but it was a really high level of production, which I don't think shows up from a film analysis perspective. I think it's just kind of a fluke of a small sample size, but it would be kind of cool. And the Vikings have talked him up a lot, and he has a lot of opportunity ahead of him. So I'm going to pick him, especially because if you're the kind of guy who watches the ball a lot, either because you want to, because that's what football is and is fun, like it's fun to watch the ball, that's the whole point, or because it's kind of what you naturally do even if you don't want to, like me. I think Tyler Conklin will be pretty interesting to watch.
Also from Kenneth Allen, would you like to see a secret base history of the Minnesota Vikings series, or would it be too depressing? I enjoyed the Falcons series, but apart from one terrible episode, it was as much as a bystander who can laugh at the situation.
So on March 4th, John, so first of all, watch that Falcon series. It's so good.
We have plugged it unmercilessly. Like, it is so good. It is so entertaining and at times just hilarious.
Yeah, like first of all, any video that John Boyce does, like 100% hit rate. I can't think of a bad video that he's done. I can't think of an average video that he's done. They've all been at least good.
One of my favorites was taking the winless Detroit Lions in Madden and just forcing them to do the exact same play the entire time. This long,
so funny. It's so funny.
Yeah, I don't think it was a crosser. I think it was just a straight. I think it was just a straight run from a run and catch from Calvin Johnson, and that was every play for the entirety of.
They designed 4 different plays. Like John Boyce designed one play, and it was the Calvin Johnson play. Very funny. they asked Richard Johnson, who's got a lot of experience in football, to design a play. And they asked two more people to design one play. They're going to run the same play all season long. What's it going to be? And John Boyce just picked, all right, we're going to have 9 people in protection. We're going to have 1 quarterback, and we're going to have Calvin Johnson, and that's it. And Calvin Johnson's just going to be running a go route.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It was brilliant. And the Lions started winning games. That was even better. It's
incredible.
Like, wow, really?
Yeah. Like, it's just so perfectly John Boyce, right? Because everybody else there was thinking about it like a football coach or like a football player, and John Boyce was thinking of it as a video game player, right? And that's totally the difference there. It's well worth watching, but definitely watch the Atlanta Falcons one because all of his videos are good, and he's somehow getting better, and he's collaborating with a bunch of other people on this one. Even the part where you get to the 1998 season, well worth watching, even for a Vikings fan. And even the stuff where Vic puts on a show against the Vikings. All really great stuff. Really incredible. I think a lot of Vikings fans at that point, I wouldn't say they began feeling comfortable or cheering for the Falcons or anything like that during the section of the 1998 game. But I think as sad and as depressing as it was, and they do go into that, it was more cathartic than anything. And it wasn't like twisting a knife, right? So, and obviously, your mileage may vary. Everybody reacts differently, but I think it's well worth it. Incredible series. He also did the last, I think, multi-part series was The Mariners. That was really good. He did Loneliness in the Age of Fighting, or Fighting in the Age of Loneliness. Sorry. That was incredible. All of these great documentaries that are done, Secret Base, just incredible. So, I recommend it, but before he did that, so between the Mariners and the Falcons one, he tweeted out something. This is March 4th. After a very brief debate between Alex and I over who are the Mariners of the NFL, we are 100% certain it's the Vikings. Both have Super Bowl/World Series droughts that started in 1977. They tied regular season wins record. They have fielded unreal amounts of talent, and they enjoy boats. And that's true. And good point. And then someone said, "Oh, so are you going to make a video series on the Vikings or a new video series?" And John Boyce answered with, "Seems too sad even for us. But who knows, maybe someday."
They were showing pity. They showed pity. A group that spent 15 minutes just hammering down on the Arkansas coach who left the Falcons with
Bobby Petrino.
Yeah, Bobby Petrino. Yep. The one who left the Falcons not by telling his players individually that he was leaving, but by leaving laminated notes in their lockers.
Like, due to circumstances out of our control, I think was on the note. The circumstances, Arkansas offered me a boatload of money. What was I supposed to do? Like, this section on Bobby Petrino might be the best one of the whole series. And what's interesting is that there is a better Bobby Petrino takedown from Bomani Jones, who we've plugged a million times on this podcast. But yeah, it's just so good. I recommend watching it. There is a point in that episode that we're referring to, so in part 4, which is the 1998 season. I think it's part 4. Where he says, the Vikings are something. The Vikings have been nearly a snake bend or as miserable as the Falcons or whatever, right? They have similar postseason success. But that's a story for another time. So it did sound like he was teasing it. But at the same time, he said, this seems too sad even for us. I would counter that the Vikings are one of the most exciting, stupid teams in the league historically. And I think there's a lot of fodder you can get out of it. Like, you can go all the way back to the wrong way run. You can go all the way to the Josh Freeman game. You can go to the 1998 season. You can go to 2005 and the Love Boat and all that. There's a ton of really fun content.
You can go into the Super Bowl where the hot air balloon thing crashed.
Oh yeah, absolutely, right. I don't think anybody can handle this better than John Boyce. And the thing is, with stuff like the wrong way run, like the thing that like Boyce does is that he tells these funny stories that are very funny, but he tells them with a lot of empathy, right? Like, it sucks that Jim Marshall is going to be remembered for that. And I think that Boyce, based off of how he's covered a lot of these events, especially like he does a really good job of this with his baseball documentaries. I don't even care about baseball. I don't even know most of the baseball rules, right? And I watch these baseball documentaries and I come away with like feeling good about watching. They're just incredible. A lot of non-sports people watch them and they like it. But he would handle that with empathy, and he would, I think, appropriately handle like the idea that like, you know, this guy that's a borderline Hall of Famer is going to be remembered for running the wrong way when he had like, you know, 10,000, 50,000 snaps doing other stuff that he was better at. So I would love to see it. Of course it would be sad, right? It's the Vikings. But I think that there's just so many funny moments. Like and the thing about the Vikings is that they're the gut punch team, right? The Falcons weren't the gut punch team until extremely recently, so it made sense to do it. But like the Vikings were just such a good subject. I can't put it another way. They're just a good subject.
You know, and one of the more underrated portions of the Falcons documentary involved two coaches that they had that just liked to challenge the reporters to fights.
Yeah. Well, one of them is a former Vikings coach.
Yep, exactly. So just the fact that existed was so much fun. So much fun. Kyle Slaby asks, if you didn't cover a specific team, which matchup would you enjoy watching and analyzing most from this weekend?
Can you imagine this answer from like 10 years ago? My answer is the Browns and Chiefs. If you had thought of that 10 years ago, right? So the 2011 Chiefs were quarterbacked by Matt Castle. The 2011 Browns were the Browns. Like, I don't have to go any deeper than that. That would have sucked. But this game rules, I think. Like on
paper, it could be quite fun.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of offense. I think there's an average amount of defense. And, you know, who cares? It's going to be a team that like throws the ball a lot. They're pretty high variance for an elite team, which is fun. And then you've got a team with like the best running game, the best offensive line in the NFL, the best running game in the NFL, a pretty interesting quarterback that Browns fans think is better than Dak Prescott. Good luck with that, guys. Obviously, Kevin Stefanski, that's going to just be fun to see him succeed if he does. That is a fun game to me. The other answer, of course, is Jaguars-Texans. I am excited to find out who is playing for the Houston Texans.
Oh yeah, the Houston Texans thing is fun because if you want to like mess with your friends, ask them to name 4 starters that are going to be starting for the Texans this year. And when they say Will Fuller,
James did this to me, and I cover the league, right? James did this to me, and I barely got it.
I did
get it though.
It is amazing, and you know a lot of good articles are being written right now about how like weird the Texans' situation is as far as their players.
Name their head coach. I know people that can name 31 head coaches in the NFL, and they cannot name the coach of the Houston Texans. Pause for whatever effect. The coach's name is, I think, David Culley. It's Coach Culley, but I think it's David. Anyway, that's the head coach of the Houston Texans. Where does he come from? Nobody knows.
He might not actually be real.
I did see a video of him. That's how I found out who he was. That a video of him circulated on Twitter.
Yeah, he's probably just a crisis actor.
Yeah, it also could be AI generated because he's the most football-y coach cliche guy that I could find. It was like very like, oh yeah, if I was going to drop a coach from the 80s, this is who I would get. Cool.
Yeah. So to quote an article from The Athletic about the Houston Texans, it said, as of this writing, the team's 53-man roster includes 33 new players and 27 men in the final season of their respective contracts.
Now, also to point out something James was about to say before I cut him off, if you do this challenge with their friends, if they say Will Fuller, remember he's suspended. He's not going to be in that game. If they say Randall Cobb, remember he famously was recently traded back to the Packers. You're running out of guys.
And it's not Deshaun Watson.
He's not starting.
It is.
He's a 4th string quarterback on a 3-quarterback roster.
It is astonishing. David Johnson, the running back, said, I feel like I'm the one who got traded or got picked up on a new team.
Which, by the way, David Johnson is not technically the starter. So we gave one away, and it's not even one of the right answers.
It is phenomenal. This team is basically football's version of the movie Major League. They're just they're just trying their best to get a high draft pick instead of trying to move to Miami. Like, this is astonishingly just amazing. All these players, they might. It's just going to be fun to see who ends up playing for them at this point.
Yeah, it could be like the 76ers. They used to go through like a bunch of new players every week, like on 10-day contracts. And they'd just be like, yeah, the coach would just be like, yeah, I want to see why the front office brought this guy in. I know nothing about him. Is he interesting? If he is, he'll stick around for a little bit longer. If not, there's going to be a new guy in about 10 days.
Yeah, basically like a version of semi-pro there. The other matchup this weekend that looks pretty intriguing, if you ask me, is Packers-Saints. I think that could be really interesting.
Watch. That's such a good hate watch. Unfortunately, not a full hate watch because Drew Brees is no longer a member of the Saints, but still a pretty good hate watch, especially because there are probably good reasons. I shouldn't say probably. There are good reasons to hate Jameis Winston. I wish he wasn't like such a piece of crap off the field, or historically had been a piece of crap off the field, because he is otherwise weirdly likable. But man, Packers, they're on, Aaron Rodgers is on a pseudo revenge tour, kind of, I guess. And the Saints have a guy that's just going to throw it deep. Is the guy open? No idea. Doesn't matter.
It really could be. Well, I think that's going to end up being, most of the country is going to end up seeing that. And thank God, because the country needs this.
Right. We absolutely need Jameis Winston. I would love for like Jameis Winston to turn out to be like pretty good, and for us to end up having that debate about whether or not it's because he can see and had LASIK eye surgery, or because he like osmosed Drew Brees by sitting next to him.
Nope. The fact that like the big news last year after the off season was dude got corrective like his eye surgery because he just didn't realize that he was like nearsighted or whatever. Like, oh my God, that would have been perfect. That would have been the greatest thing possible. So I really want that to end up happening. Also from Kyle Slaby says, since the body completely replaces its cells every 7 to 10 years, and I've been following the pod for about half that time, am I technically a new person from the one who decided to listen for the first time? Also, assuming that's true, will a reef finally follow me?
Kyle, no. Second, obviously Kyle is very familiar with our Ship of Theseus, also Avril of Theseus discussions, which I believe emerged from a laptop, right?
Probably.
Yeah, because I had like at the time we were recording, this is way back in like 2013.
Oh, yes. This would have been 2012.
Yeah. I was talking about how difficult it was to record because my laptop wasn't behaving. And I had mentioned that I had replaced every single part of my laptop over time with new parts, right? Even the chassis and the panel. And so most of this was done by me. Obviously, some of it had to be done by, I think it was HP at the time. And so I effectively had a new laptop, and I was like, oh, it's like the Ship of Theseus. And then we explained what the Ship of Theseus was, which was this, except a boat. And the philosopher, whoever it was, some Greek philosopher, there's a lot of those, posed the question of when is it a new ship, or is it in essence the same ship the whole time? Does the essence of that ship get transferred into the pieces that are new to the ship? And if it happens faster or slower, does that change whatever, right? Anyway, Slaby, if you believe in souls, obviously not. You're just the same person. If you don't, that's a silly question anyway, because we don't define personhood by yourselves. Silly. Also, yeah, obviously you're a new person than the one who decided to listen for the first time. You're a new person from the person that decided to listen at the beginning of the show. I'm sorry for how you've changed, but it's unchangeable. Or I should say irrevocable.
There you go.
You will continue to change as a person, and we have permanently become a part of your identity, and you just have to live with that fact now.
That's a wonderfully wholesome moment there from Marie Fasam. Chris asks, if you were given a year and offered the NFL vet minimum as a prize, could you complete one 55-yard field goal, and how would you change your life to meet this goal?
So, like, I have time. I have a year. Okay, I have a full year to see if I can complete one 55-yard field goal. So, my understanding of the phrasing of this question is, at any point in the year, I can attempt as many times as I want to kick the 55-yard field goal, right? if I was given a year and offered the vet minimum as a prize, could you complete one 55-yard field goal?
Yep.
Okay. So it's not, can I complete it given one attempt? And I would have to work my way up to the prize winning attempt. Because if it's one up to that attempt, if I only get one attempt at the end of the year, I don't think I could do it, period. I think that the odds are really low. If I, for the first 6 months, train extensively to do this, and then for the next 6 months while I'm training, also attempt it every day, I don't know, 10 times a day, it's actually fairly apparently strenuous on your body to do a lot of field goal kicks. 10 times a day for 6 months, could I complete one 55-yard field goal? I'm going to be dumb and say yes. I think if I get what is like 180, so 1,800 attempts after 6 months of training, while also continuously training. Yeah. And then obviously I don't get to hire a kicking coach or anything like that, right? Because it's just, how would you change your life to meet this goal? And if I hired a kicking coach, it probably wouldn't be worth it, because the prize is the NFL vet minimum, which is like $500,000, but I don't want to like fritter it away. So yeah, I would obviously, I would do a lot of research. I would do a lot of training. 500,000. I assume the NFL vet minimum is the minimum NFL vet minimum, because it's different for every number of accrued years you have, because at some point it hits like 1 million. But yeah, I would continue to cover the Vikings, but I would like practice extensively. I would make some investments, right? Like I'd make sure I could find a gym where I can practice and sign up with that gym. But
I feel like a training montage would be important.
Of course. Yeah, easily. I'd eat healthier, which I already eat okay, but I still eat fast food from time to time. But yeah, I would eat healthier. I would definitely figure out what my training regimen is. I did start rock climbing recently, so I would probably stop doing that and start doing some pretty specific training for this task. But I'm no longer as unfit as I was 6 months ago. I'm still very unfit.
Like I'm trying. I'm not there
doing
yet.
Better. I'm doing better. Get off my back, James.
I'm my support of you is obvious throughout the entirety of this show and the entirety of the run of the show. So don't worry about it. Don't be concerned. As somebody who's done a bit of kicking before, no, absolutely not. At this age, my hamstrings will explode attempting to practice this.
When you say you've done a bit of kicking, you mean as a kicker?
Yes.
Oh, okay. The closest I've gotten is I've done a bunch of goalie kicks in soccer.
No, I've done like actual practice of kicks before in school, and no, and a little bit in college because I was bored, and Valley was looking.
Can I have you train me?
Maybe Valley was looking for anyone who could was looking for like bodies. It's like, how much of my college are you willing to pay for this? I'm just curious. They were just looking for a kicker. I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. Just not worth it. Let's go to the next question for Uzo, which is Ricardo. Hello, sirs. I read that the Vikes claimed a former NDSU tight end off waivers. How did Indy think they were going to sneak Wentz through waivers? Thanks.
Great question, Ricardo. Yeah, it's, I guess, they didn't go with Carson Incognito, which would have been great. They decided to slap him with a real name, Ben Ellefson, who, if you look, I mean, they did a bunch of deep fake work. I mean, he's listed on the NDSU roster as having played for them. He has fake stats they even put up in their official stats page, which I think violates a couple of rules for sports information departments for the NCAA.
I would imagine at this point it sounds more like the beginning of, say, a spy thriller.
Oh, yeah. What nefarious acts is Carson Incognito up to?
That, boy, how much time have you got? Because all I've been doing is subjecting people to like Saw-style horrors in fantasy football. So...
but no, I don't know anything about Ben Ellefson. I have studiously decided not to study him. There probably could have been a better sentence there. Moving on.
Moving on to Arif's neglected resistance bans. Now that I'm fully vaccinated, will Arif please stop social distancing from me? Luke Braun asks, recommended all-purpose seasonings to get. Thanks to dietary restrictions, we can't cook with garlic or onions. Dried salts and powders are fine. And with the season on, time's going to be too short to custom season everything. Any favorites?
So I saw the replies to this tweet, Luke. You got a bunch of replies. A lot of them are really good. I don't really have a bunch of negative things to say about them. I don't think James does either, but he has a strong preference. So he thinks all of those answers are wrong. So I'll be excited to hear what he has to say. I have had some success with Lowry's seasonal back when I was living a bachelor life. I guess I'm still technically a bachelor, not married, but like that's not really how I'm living right now. That was pretty useful. I did get sick of it. So someone recommended Penzeys spices in that thread, and that's what I would recommend it too. I went to Penzeys. I did a very brief search, so maybe they do have something. But I went to Penzeys, and I looked it up, and they don't seem to have a generic all-purpose seasoning, but they do have a bunch of seasoning mixes. And I have used a number of their seasoning mixes. Like they've got a sandwich seasoning, which is actually good for a number of French dishes and Italian dishes. They have an Italian seasoning. They've got curry powders and stuff like that. Which, if you're really low on ideas and don't have a ton of things, get a good curry powder, put some salt in it, and that's a pretty decent seasonal. But I would peruse their website because their stuff is so good because they make sure that they don't have any fillers in their spices. Their stuff is really fresh when they grind it. And so it's just a more powerful, more effective flavor I found from Penzeys than I get from a typical grocery store spice mix. But I don't know that they have a generic all-purpose seasoning. They have a bunch of seasoning mixes. If you don't like that and you want a more specific recommendation for an all-purpose, I think Lowry's is pretty good. But it sounds like James has like an answer here.
Well, my personal favorite is from the guys who do the barbecue channel, How to Barbecue Right.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you love their stuff.
Yeah, and the AP seasoning that comes out of there is basically just salt, pepper, garlic, and it tastes. Hell, I even used it tonight before the show. Like 20 minutes before the show, I ended up getting a little bit of food and just sprinkled a little bit on it, and it popped it really nicely. So I really like that particular one. That one works for me. Lowry's isn't bad, but it's definitely a starter.
It's definitely a starter. Yeah.
It's a good place to start, but other stuff exists and other stuff is good. So that's worth mentioning.
Yeah. I would recommend getting a couple of spice mixes and using them, and that's I mean James swears by that, so I would put that in there. But the Sunny Paris, the Penzeys pepper, the Fox Point, the Mural of Flavor, and the Penzeys Revolution are all very good spice mixes to just have on hand.
Yeah, just grab some plain chicken breasts and thaw, frozen or whatever. Just thaw them out and just try them and see what you end up liking. I think a chicken breast would be a really good way to figure out if this is something that if this is like a good taste for you or whatever. So
yeah, that's a great test platform for a bunch of spice mixes. Yeah, is the chicken breast. Yeah.
Kevin Sayer asks, do you see the defensive scheme returning in complexity or reverting more to the cover 2 style that we saw after the bye week last year?
I think that we're going to see return to complexity. I don't think that we're going to see split field safeties all that often, just because I think that the way the Vikings have been designing their defense seemingly is to kind of move to single high safety, and that high safety would be Xavier Woods. And to have Harrison Smith kind of roaming around. It is entirely possible that they do kind of what the Ravens used to do with Ed Reed, which is a cover 4 style defense that had Ed Reed specifically kind of freelance a little bit. Obviously, Troy Polamalu did something fairly similar in a similar defensive setup that ended up turning a lot of those looks into functionally cover 3, even though they were called by the coordinator to be cover 4. And those safeties just kind of react off of instinct. Everyone just kind of has to react to what the safety is doing. That's entirely possible, but I think primarily we're going to see a bunch of cover 3 looks that are going to find ways to protect Patrick Peterson and Bashad Breeland against speed. So we'll see. But I don't think it's going to be a bunch of the cover 2. I think we're going to see cover 4. I think we're going to see cover 3. We might see cover 1 with a bunch of blitz looks. But I think that it is going to ramp back up in complexity. And I think adding those veterans to the roster was a big part of that.
Next question is also from Kevin Sayer, who asks, Fur Reef's COVID corner. I officially have it and I feel like crap. Bad sinus, bad throat, bad lethargy, bad no smell, no taste. Oh, and my boiler broke, so no hot water, and no one allowed to fix it. So what's the best magical food to eat to bring my taste and smell back?
First, Kevin, I'm sorry. I hope you get better. That really sucks. Second, I don't know that there's a food that will bring back taste and smell. But if your stove works, which it sounds like it's just the hot water that doesn't work, so your stove might still work. Or maybe you could, Amazon an electric kettle or something like that to get hot water. But if that works, I guess I would kind of make the soups that are most reminiscent of your childhood. So for a lot of people, that's chicken noodle. For some people, that's tomato. It kind of doesn't matter. It's just got to be hearty, and it has to remind you of childhood. That's probably going to be the closest to doing that thing. Plus, you should probably get liquids in your body. That seems smart to me. So, yeah, that's my answer.
I mean, maybe, but if you
okay, what's your answer?
If you really just want to mess with your body at this point, I would suggest when you start to when taste and starts to come back a little bit, go with something called miracle fruit tablets. Have you heard of what these do?
Oh my god, yeah. But that only works if your taste buds work.
Well, that's what I mean. Like as your taste buds come back, like just to throw your body for a loop, like the day after you start to be able to slowly get taste buds back, take that and then you can freak your friends out by just starting eating a lemon on Zoom. I mean, like COVID's not treating me well. Chomp, chomp. Oh God.
Yeah. Of course, this podcast would default to play pranks on your body.
I mean, yeah. Why else exist if you're not going to, if you're not going to have a little bit of fun and horrify people? It works for me. Don from Ohio asks, for a Reef's Travel Corner, what snacks do you recommend taking your carry-on bag / backpack for a 15-hour flight?
Jesus Christ. Actually, I don't have a good answer to this because I would primarily want to reduce the amount of crumbs that are produced. And the snacks that I like tend to produce a lot of crumbs. Like I like Cheetos, I like pretzels on planes. And obviously they give you pretzels, right? If you really like kind of the softer, chewy cookies, which from Chips Ahoy anyway, I don't. I like the crunchy cookies more. Those tend to produce a little bit less in terms of crumbs. So I'd probably get those cookies because they're like a pretty decent snacking food. But yeah, beef jerky. Actually, that's a really good one. A jerky of some sort. Tends to produce a lot less crumbs, tends to be fairly filling. They tend to satiate a lot of different, cravings that you end up getting. I think jerky is actually a pretty good answer. That might be my best answer here.
I saw a commercial for it, and then I happened to see it in the store and went, well, I'll give it a shot because I do like the original product. And you were mentioning about cleanliness aspect of things. The Cheez-It Snapped things are actually not bad. I was kind of surprised.
I love Cheez-Its. I don't like a lot of the Cheez-Its variations, so I wasn't really into the Snapped.
I'm not into the variation stuff, but I do like the Snapped thing. I was very surprised by how much I ended up enjoying it. So
interesting.
That could be interesting. Also, for James's wedding corner, I'm having a hard time writing my vows. Any recommendations? I would have posted this as a Reef's wedding corner, but my vows need to be under 8,000 words, so our sunset wedding doesn't finish in the dark.
Well, what's wrong with finishing in the dark? Just schedule the wedding a little earlier. It's fine.
They're having enough troubles with all of the things happening in Hawaii for this, according to Twitter. So I don't know if I would want to throw one more wrench into this.
Yeah, so get James to write your vows. Yeah.
Hey, I think my wife enjoyed my vows, and then I was told that they were more than acceptable. So as somebody who at that point anyway, I had just retired from DJing weddings for 17 years, something like that. and somebody who used to make a ton of mix CDs for people, I ended up turning my vows into a mix CD and ended up quoting a bunch of song titles.
That rules. Oh my God.
And then as a gift at the reception, I ended up burning a CD with all of those songs in order and gave that to her at the reception. Like that was, I at least tried. Like I didn't, this was something that ended up working. So I'm not saying that you should do this. I'm just saying that I didn't half-ass that. So, and if I'm not saying that Don should steal this, I'm just saying that find something that is like a personal quirk of yours, personal thing that you do, and just incorporate into that. Maybe that works. I don't know. I don't know what Don has to really brag about as far as other than the fact that he has that hot tub that I've been threatening people are going to have to clean if they do not start their kickers in the Norse Code Leagues. So I just providing him free labor at this point. Ollie Hain asks our final question of the day. Question for Arif's Beekeeping Corner. How many race wars will Jason Statham be involved in the new thriller called The Beekeeper?
Okay, so yeah, this as soon as it was announced, it hit both of our mentions pretty quickly, because this is well within our apiary discussions,
our wheelhouse. Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, sure, man. We're gonna have to watch this movie.
Yes,
obviously.
that is going to end up having to happen. Yes,
and I expect James to Venmo me from the Patreon the cost of the ticket.
Patreon funds will be involved in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
and we will each be allowed to get a single popcorn, but not soda because this stuff is expensive.
Right? Yeah,
we're not.
You guys don't give enough on Patreon to pay for my soda.
No, we're not. We're not at Jay Cutler level yet. Yeah. So if we're at Jay Cutler level, then one of us will get a soda. But until then,
I don't love the idea of having to explain to Chelsea that we need to see The Beekeeper. Hey, I know you're not super into Jason Statham action movies, but like, I have to see this, and I'd like it if you came along. Why do you have to see it? It's for work.
A Beekeeper movie is about work. Well, yes, because I need to see. Hold on. Let me see if I can get a.
We're advanced enough in this relationship where either you trust me or you don't.
Oh God, you're gonna pull that one out. I was gonna say, let me get a Christmas episode out and let me play a little bit of the bee stuff so you understand my involvement in this. No, you went full to. Listen, we've been together for some time. Do you trust me?
So that's not a chip you can play very often, right? Like when you play that,
I wouldn't suggest playing it at all.
It's gone for a while. But I think for something as low stakes as a movie, I'm not losing a ton of credibility by using it there.
Depends on how.
If it was a bit more high stakes, if it was like, look, I'm going to renovate the bathroom how I want it to look, and I want it to be a surprise to you. Do you trust me? That's a big chip to cash, right? That's tough.
That's right up there with showing up with a car for a Christmas gift.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my! The discussions we've had on that. Yeah. Exactly. It's just a movie. It's some time. It's some money. Some of which will be comped by work, Chelsea. So it's not that big an ask. I just don't want to go through the rigmarole of having to explain all this beekeeping stuff, and I'm gonna have to pay particular attention in the movie to any discussions of race and racial politics, because that's the direction the Beekeeping Corner went in for some reason.
It's because you presented it so well that it became everyone's favorite, and now it's we're playing the state fairs. We got to play the hits, and every time it turns into that. Yeah, the discussion on this is just fantastic. And Jason Statham has found his next project, The Beekeeper, a thriller written by Kurt Wimmer of Point Break remake fame. This is
Point Break remake. I mean, the remake actually was not bad.
The outlet, this is from the vulture.com article. The quote is, the outlet described the movie as, quote, deeply steeped in the mythology of beekeeping, which we guess is an all caps thing with its own mythology. Beekeeper explores universal themes with an unconventional story that will have fans sitting on the edge of their seats, Miramax CEO Bill Block said in a statement. The film has yet to find a director, but hopes to begin shooting in September 2022. Maybe by then a studio can arrange a Beyonce cameo as well. Yeah, this is...
it sounds like it's actually in development hell, and whoever got word of the beekeeping movie just decided to push it. But I really want it to be a thing.
I want this so badly to be a thing, almost as much as I want the CJ Ham in the tight end spot this episode. So yeah, this is pretty ridiculous, and I love every second of it, and cannot wait to make all of the beekeeping jokes.
So I assume that Jason Statham is the beekeeper, right? Because in a lot of these movies, he plays like a humble everyman that starts out, or a guy disguised as a humble everyman that's left a life of crime and is leaving it all behind and is just a humble apiarist. And he tries as hard as he can, but he gets pulled back in. Also, the Vulture categorized this under Buzz, which I hope was unintentional, because it would make sense for them to have a section titled Buzz. But also, yeah. But yeah, I assume he's the beekeeper. If he's not the beekeeper, is there a beekeeper? Is the beekeeper apocryphal? Is it a metaphorical beekeeper?
The real beekeeper are the friends that we made along the way, like that sort of thing. You know, and the fact that this movie is being put together, theoretically, makes me want to have this to be some sort of a Crank mix, like with Crank and Beekeeper. Like he needs to get stung by the bees in order to learn more and continue on.
Rule. The bees give him forbidden knowledge.
Yeah, the bees give him forbidden knowledge, and that knowledge leaves him when he has to use his EpiPen.
Oh my god, he's a beekeeper allergic to... Actually, that's not that rare. But a beekeeper allergic to bee stings, but needs to get stung in order to accomplish the goals of the movie. Yeah, that's great. Yep.
Hey, there you've got a much better plot than a couple of the movies I've been hearing about recently. So this I want this to... I mean, obviously this is we're talking Oscars here. We're talking sequels. We're talking toys. Jason Statham is really going to make this his own. I look forward to this. And that is going to be this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will be back on Monday night, Tuesday morning, with a recap of the Bengals game. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So at The Athletic, I think I've written all the pieces that I'm going to write this week. So you can find some of the national level pieces that I read. I wrote a piece on Josh Allen, whether or not he's going to regress. I wrote a piece on the defense, whether or not it's going to regress, but positively back to what we consider the Zimmer average. I also have done a couple of podcasts on the Bengals already. So the one I was on with John Sheeran was the Believe in Bengals podcast, although I think it's called Believe in the #1 Bengals podcast. I think I was just it was on radio too, so you could probably find that. Anyway, did a lot of stuff this week. Most of it was not written, but you can find my stuff at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. And that's where you can find the Josh Allen stuff, the season preview stuff that I just posted with Chad, the game preview stuff that's going to be up by the time that most of you are listening to this episode, and the defensive regression piece.
And I actually get to plug something this week. How about that? That's weird. I was actually brought on to an episode of Locked On Vikings last week, where it was the day that all the roster cuts were happening that didn't make any sense. And instead of doing a real show, Luke Braun just had me on, and we talked about the fantasy league and just life as a Vikings fan. So if you're interested in such silliness, you can find that over at Locked On Vikings. I believe that was the episode titled Irv Smith Jr. will miss the 2021 season and other roster nonsense. So you can check that out. I had a lot of fun. Luke's awesome, and we obviously had a lot of fun with him in the actual for the live show that we had last month. So check that out. But that is going to be this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back next week. So for Arif, my name is James. Please enjoy yourself, enjoy the Vikings game, and always remember, Case Cookus. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.